can a person truly remember the day they were born? If such a memory were possible, they would surely feel gratitude for having endured such pain and would never take their life for granted. One of the killer's subordinates, addressing him as Mr. Bobby, reports that the money cannot be found. Without hesitation, Bobby executes him on the spot, warning the others that they will meet the same fate unless they locate it. Meanwhile, the system addresses a surviving man, asking if he wishes to return, cautioning that all of his abilities will be reset. It requests a date, and he answers, February 28, 1985, the day of his birth. In an instant, he awakens inside his mother's womb, moments before delivery. The sensation is overwhelming, unlike anything he has ever experienced, as if his head is about to burst. Amid his mother's anguished cries, he realizes she may be in danger if he doesn't act. Pushing forward, he secures the Overcoming Adversity achievement, along with the trait known as the Man Who Overcame Adversity. This trait triggers whenever he becomes unable to fight, instantly raising all of his skills and stats by 1 rank, while nullifying pain during activation. He reflects that this very trait was what once made the first evil so terrifyingly powerful. It is a dangerous ability, capable of turning the tide of battle in mere moments. Thus begins his journey toward health. The system generously rewards him upon completion, and he realizes these same rewards must have been why the first evil had grown so strong. There were once 16 S-class Awakeners, 8 virtues and 8 evils. Those who remained loyal to the system were hailed as virtues, while those who rejected it were branded as evils. Despite the labels, neither side was noble, for both acted out of selfishness before anything else. They opposed the monopolization of dungeons and resources, but they were hopelessly outmatched. The first evil, above all, reigned supreme. While other Awakeners puzzled over their abilities, he possessed flawless understanding of his own. He never expected another Awakener like himself to arise, all because of his idle talk about memories as a fetus. Struggling to speak, his first words emerge, status window. To his relief, he succeeds. The system congratulates him, declaring him the first Awakener, and rewards him with a Challenger's Box, the very item that once allowed him to travel back in time. He never thought he would see it again. From the box, he acquires the skill Odin's Wrath, once wielded by the 6th virtue, a devastating ability. He cannot forget the day half of his guild was annihilated by a mere flick of that hand. With this power, however, he finally has the means to fight back. Still, he must prepare for the coming day of beginnings. Overwhelmed, he begins to cry, waking his parents. Though he doesn't wish to cry, his frail infant body betrays him. His mother gently soothes him, whispering that her only wish is for him to grow up healthy and free of illness. With that, they drift back to sleep. But deep inside, he knows the real reason he chose to return: to protect everyone. He vows he will not lose a single person, no matter what sacrifice it demands. He remembers the past clearly. On an ordinary day, while aimlessly walking and speaking on the phone, disaster-struck beasts rained down from the sky, hungering for human flesh. Terrified, he tried to flee, but the system abruptly transported him to the testing grounds, along with countless others seemingly chosen at random. This marked the day of beginnings, when monsters spilled endlessly through ruptured dimensions. The chosen Awakeners were thrown into the testing site, where some endured months, while others languished for decades. Yet when they finally returned, it was not to peace. They were forced into relentless battle against monsters, their survival hinging on strength alone. Seeing the devastation unfold, the human leaders resorted to their strongest weapon, a nuclear strike. Yet even that failed, and soon after, the nation crumbled. The 8 virtues and the 8 evils pursued their own selfish desires without consequence. He sat watching television, the setting resembling the Cold War era. In his mind, such conflicts seemed meaningless, destined to fade in just a few years. His parents noticed his serious expression and playfully teased him, trying to lighten the mood. He thought to himself that they were still alive now, but he knew an unthinkable event would soon arrive. He couldn't afford to neglect his preparations. That night, he awoke and attempted to leave his room. His legs gave out, and he collapsed, drifting into a brief sleep on the floor. Moments later, he forced himself back up and managed to take his first 10 steps. The system immediately rewarded him with vitality and other stat increases. It congratulated him for independently overcoming the growth condition and presented him with a bronze box. He was stunned. The bronze box was a reward that normally demanded suffering and extreme effort just for a chance to obtain. To be granted one outright was overwhelming. But now he was certain he would find the first evil and eliminate him before he could grow in strength. He would never allow such a walking calamity to exist. While sitting outside, a new quest appeared: engage in a conversation of 10 or more sentences with a target. At first, he thought it would be easy, but then came the question, who could he possibly speak with? If he attempted to talk with his parents, they would only react with shock and suspicion. He glanced at the calendar and saw that Thanksgiving was approaching. On that day, he met Gia, a 4-year-old girl with remarkable speech for her age. He mused that she spoke like someone who had already passed the bar exam, and her beauty was undeniable. Yet fate was cruel. Gia went missing on that very day. He wondered if, had he trained harder, he might have been able to save her. She hugged him warmly, and that was when he began speaking with her. Sunun, who carried on a conversation, and Gia's parents watched, remarking on how close the two already seemed. He asked Gia to keep their talk a secret from the adults, and she agreed. With that, he completed the chain quest for human life. To his surprise, he had now finished every available quest in the tutorial. He hadn't realized this entire experience was merely a tutorial stage. The system then offered him the option to skip the remainder of infancy and childhood. Though he longed to spend more time with his parents, he knew he risked exposing his true nature. Choosing caution, he skipped the tutorial and steeled himself for the day of destiny. The year was now 1997. He found himself in an underground fight, facing off against a burly opponent. With ease, he defeated him. The crowd roared, and the organizer remarked that Sunun, who always won, even destroying the Mapo district during one of his battles. The man congratulated him, but Sunun, who dismissed it, demanding stronger opponents. The organizer hesitated, warning that Sunun, whose skills surpassed the level of ordinary fighters, he was competing at a world-class standard. Sunun, whose eyes narrowed. He told the man he would not repeat himself, either find him more opponents or he would look elsewhere. Opening his status window, he saw his stats had risen significantly, with 87 unspent points waiting for allocation. Sunun, who reflected on his growth. His body had already matured into that of an adult, his strength and perception exceeding those of most trained athletes. Removing his cap, he gazed at his reflection in the mirror. Thanks to being an awakener, his wounds healed far faster than normal. Once average in height during his student days, he now towered at 180 centimeters. Clearly, the stats he had raised during the tutorial had carried over. Still, he knew he wouldn't yet pass the official testing site. To reach the next stage, he needed to raid dungeons. He had already scouted one in Hasang City, a small mountain harboring an F-rank dungeon. Preparations were essential. First, he would need to purchase the mountain, seal it off, and set up defenses in case any monster escaped during the raid. The mountain stands at about 1.3 million, and when factoring in the defensive facilities, the amount of money required is staggering. Yet, that's only part of the challenge. Scattered throughout the world lie hidden dungeons, and monopolizing them is equally essential. Scratching his head, he realizes he needs to take things a step further. With his knowledge of the future, earning money isn't difficult. He could amass a fortune in no time. But there's a problem. He's still a minor. That status alone prevents him from doing much. What he truly needs is a proxy. Just as he's lost in thought, his teacher places her hand in front of his face, urging him to focus on his studies. But middle school lessons are the last thing on his mind right now. His thoughts drift back to the past, to the day when two of his guild members betrayed him. Their faces were twisted with desperation as they apologized. Sun, who gripped the spears impaled through his body, and in that moment, he raised both the betrayers and the ground beneath him. He blamed it all on a cursed box. Then, from the shadows, a man appeared. He remarked that what Sun, who had just used, was the insignia of destruction. Sun, who immediately assumed that this man, Jonathan, had come to betray him as well. Instead, Jonathan used the insignia of healing to mend his wounds, saying his debt had now been repaid. Relieved, Sun, who felt hope-proof that compassion still existed in this world. Together, they left the cave, where Jonathan began speaking about Wall Street and the financial markets. Sun, who recalled how his country had once been in turmoil, scarred by the events of '97. Jonathan revealed he had been a trader during the Asian currency crisis, at his prime in Hong Kong. As they rested, Jonathan mentioned that his nickname was the Wolf of Wall Street, reminiscing about the days when money dictated everything. Though he achieved high-ranking stats that others envied, he remained shackled to his past. At just 25, Jonathan should have been working at Wall Street, and he often mentioned the Wolf of Wall Street not for himself, but because the firm he worked for carried Wolf in its name. Sun, who searched for him by tracing that company and eventually found him. Though Jonathan's face bore no despair, Sun, who recognized him instantly. He decided to send him an email, casually asking whether the Thai baht was currently overvalued. At the time, Jonathan suspected hedge funds were preparing an attack on the Thai baht, though he lacked certainty. If he could have invested boldly with the knowledge of hindsight, his memories of that era would have been far more than self-indulgent stories. Jonathan's reply was simple: the Thai baht was not overvalued. Sun, who smirked. He knew Jonathan was downplaying it. Writing back, he pressed further, explaining that what he meant by overvalued was, couldn't someone leverage it? That one question set everything in motion. Almost immediately, Jonathan's next email arrived, demanding to know Sun, whose identity and affiliation. This was precisely the response Sun, who had been waiting for. He began drafting multiple emails, warning that Asia was a prime target for hedge funds and that the Thai baht would be attacked within a month. Yet Thailand was not their true objective, it was only the beginning. Jonathan was shaken by the answers. He knew Wall Street was in a precarious state, and the fact that this mysterious sender had casually used the term leverage suggested someone experienced in finance. Jonathan decided to treat it as a test. He wrote back, saying his office was always open, and even included his contact information. Sun, who had anticipated exactly this reaction. To him, Jonathan was being guided toward the truth. Jonathan, meanwhile, struggled to understand who this enigmatic figure was, someone who seemed to know all the answers, yet forced him to piece everything together. Confident in Jonathan's instincts, Sun, who believed he would not let this chance slip away. Soon, a declaration of war would erupt within the financial markets. By April 1997, the predicted hedge fund assault on the Thai baht had begun. In 1992, a single hedge fund had needed just 50 days to break the British pound. To Wall Street, it was only natural to expect Thailand's collapse within the same timeframe. While training, Sun, who reflected on how the Thai baht didn't collapse as easily as expected. It resisted strongly and even managed to deal a heavy blow to hedge funds for more than 3 months. But in the end, on July 2nd, Thailand finally fell. After the attacks on the baht began, Jonathan sent Sunhu over 10 emails. The subject of those emails was the investment products he had obtained by betting on the currency's fall back in May. Sunhu replied, saying that if Jonathan had any investments based on the baht rising, then they could talk. Jonathan believed the products he had shared were only the type supplied to VIPs. How, then, could the baht possibly rise? On top of that, this man was asking for 51% in return for an investment proposal. Jonathan tidied his desk, scoffing at what he considered nothing more than a scam. What else could he expect in this day and age? He reached for his phone to contact other VIPs, but hesitated, setting it down again. Instead, he asked Sunhu how he had come to the conclusion that hedge funds would lose. The reply came almost instantly. Sunhu clarified that he never meant hedge funds would necessarily lose, but that Thai banks had numerous methods to defend themselves. His conclusion was that the bot would, at least in the short term, rise. Jonathan nearly choked on his drink after reading this. Wall Street was betting on the bot collapsing in May. Their confidence was so absolute that they were using this moment to strengthen their ties with VIPs. But if the bot did not collapse, there would be chaos on Wall Street. Should he make others aware of this possibility? He tried, but his boss mocked him, belittling the very idea as absurd. Grinding his teeth, Jonathan gathered his research and emailed Sunhu again, stating that Wolf Corporation had no intention of developing such an investment product in the first place. Sunhu replied, saying that was exactly why he suggested Jonathan should go independent. Exhausted, Jonathan argued that giving away 51% was like handing over both his money and his future. Who in their right mind would agree to such terms? Sunhu calmly told him to think carefully. The offer would remain valid until the end of May. With that, he stopped responding. Jonathan nearly lost his mind. Everyone dismissed and ridiculed him, and he had no idea what to do. Then one day, the Asian Central Bank extended a bilateral agreement with a $12 billion aid package for Thailand. Wall Street was thrown into disarray. Jonathan was stunned. That man had been right all along. The bot actually rose. Overwhelmed, Jonathan shed a tear just as his boss summoned him. His boss introduced him to a few VIPs, all furious about the bot's unexpected rise. Jonathan quickly realized his boss was using him as a buffer, pushing him forward to avoid any fallout. Calmly, Jonathan handed them his card and announced that from today, he would be leaving Wolf Corporation to establish his own investment company. His phone number would remain the same, and they could reach him anytime. His boss was taken aback, but Jonathan explained that he knew he had long wanted him gone, so he was merely granting his wish. Besides, sponsors would flock to him anyway after all. He was the only one who had managed to avoid the catastrophe. Back in training, Sunhu received Jonathan's message and smiled. He told Jonathan to come to Seoul immediately. At school, Sunhu felt detached. His imposing physique caused most people to avoid him, which was fine by him. He didn't want anyone approaching in the first place. As the hallway cleared of students, memories resurfaced. Scenes of a ruined city, where everyone had died brutally, still lingered in his mind. A teacher watching him from a distance suddenly burst into tears, though she couldn't explain why. Later, Sunhu met Jonathan at the airport. As they walked to sit down, Jonathan couldn't help but think how strange it was to see this man in person. He appeared far too composed, given the urgency of their meeting. Still, his skill in writing emails had been exceptional. What else should he have expected? When they finally sat, Sunhu confirmed that he had indeed written all the emails himself and thanked Jonathan for coming. Jonathan stood and asked, almost incredulously, how old he really was. Maybe 19 or 20. He had come here with everything on the line. Did he even realize what he had just done? Sunhu caught his sharp glare and calmly asked if he judged people by age on Wall Street. Still, he added that he wouldn't stop him if he wished to leave, but as a token for coming such a long way, he would at least gift him something. Jonathan accepted it, and as his eyes scanned the contents, they widened in surprise. Sunhu urged him to sit and continued, asking if the Asian economic crisis hadn't been inevitable the moment the United States began lending the dollar without limit. After all, wasn't the 21st century destined to belong to Asia with the rise of the Four Dragons? All the hedge funds did was place their spoons into the pot. "How is the report I gave you?" he asked. Jonathan admitted that it suggested Thailand would collapse. Sunhu pressed further, asking what his thoughts had been before reading it. Jonathan hesitated, unable to answer easily, because this was the very climate of Wall Street uncertainty and hesitation. Hedge funds had recently been shaken by Thailand's unexpected resistance, a battle no one had predicted would end as it had. That atmosphere persisted until July 2nd, when the Thai government finally raised the white flag in surrender. Jonathan remarked that in the end, the attackers would prevail, but also pointed out that something vital was missing from the report. "Then let me be the one to answer that," Sun Eunhoo said. "But first, you must decide if you're willing to work with me." Jonathan thought carefully. He believed Sun Eunhoo was underestimating him because of his age, and that would be a grave mistake. "With my money and my record, I already have everything. The real question is, what do you have?" Sun Eunhoo asked if this opportunity alone wasn't enough. He could have chosen someone else, after all, and even now, as they spoke, money was being lost by the second. Jonathan countered that if he wagered on Wall Street's downfall, the gains could be enormous. But the proposal was too sudden. He needed time to think. Sun Eunhoo exhaled slowly. "Then I'll wait until June 3rd. "Why such a specific date?" Jonathan asked. Analyzing the information, he noticed an unusual spike. "Is this June 2nd? "All that remains is to calculate how much will be lost in the days ahead," Sun Eunhoo replied. Jonathan shook his head. "Unless you're a god, you can't possibly predict an exact date. This is too precise to be real." Sun Eunhoo turned his back. "I'll wait until June 3rd. If you cannot decide by then, that will mark the end of our relationship." If Jonathan was truly the man Sun Eunhoo believed him to be, he would make the right choice. And indeed, a few days later, Jonathan relented. He asked what the company name should be. During their meeting, Sun Eunhoo asked if Jonathan regretted his decision. Jonathan admitted he did, but it was far too late. The value of the report was undeniable. "I can understand predicting a downturn," he said, "but how could you possibly know the exact date?" "Calculations," Sun Eunhoo replied simply. Jonathan wanted to argue, but held back. He would not doubt him anymore. Sun Eunhoo promised to give him the ingredients for success. "What about the recipe?" Jonathan asked. Sun Eunhoo smirked, and Jonathan flushed, conceding, "Fine, I'll trust you." Then, as if remembering, he added, "I should at least know the name of my business partner." Sun Eunhoo finally introduced himself, and Jonathan proposed naming the company Jonathan and Sun Investment. But Sun Eunhoo declined. "Leave me out of the name." Jonathan insisted it was fine, and revealed that he was committing $400,000, everything he had. Sun Eunhoo thought he was reckless, even a little mad, to give a stranger 51% of his fortune. Jonathan, however, pressed him. "Do you have anything to add in?" "No," Sun Eunhoo replied. "That's why I called you to Korea in the first place." Jonathan asked why he had chosen him specifically. Sun Eunhoo explained that he had simply found him on the company's website. "Are you disappointed?" he asked. Jonathan shook his head. "Not at all. Opportunities come in the strangest ways, but never when you're searching for them." Sun Eunhoo paused. Those were words he had heard from Jonathan before. Originally, he had planned to save his points until he could open a challenger box. But instead, he had used them on a master box, intending to sell the item and abandon everything, surrendering to his base desires. Yet, against all odds, what he had received was a skill that should only have existed in a challenger box. The chance of finding a box containing items far superior to its rank is nothing short of miraculous. Yet, that miracle was given to a man who had already abandoned everything. From that moment, his path was set. He lived only for revenge, ignoring Sun Eunhoo's pleas to reconsider. That would be Jonathan's final memory of him, before learning later of his death. Jonathan, recalling the past, suddenly asks why Sun Eunhoo is staring at him like that. Is it because he once called him an opportunity? If so, then as that opportunity, he should prove himself by delivering a divine calculation. Sun Eunhoo doesn't answer directly, but instead asks if Jonathan is willing to follow him without hesitation, without questions. Jonathan agrees, urging him to sign the prepared documents, then casually asks if he brought identification. Sunun, who pulls out a slip of paper, explaining that this is the only way he can identify himself now. The 13 digits written on it are the equivalent of a US social security number. Jonathan glances at it and freezes. The boy is only 13. Shocked, he looks back, but Sunun, who brushes it off. There's no time for surprises, he insists. They need to discuss business. He reveals his forecast. During the second week of June, between the 9th and the 13th, the market will fall by 10%. Jonathan asks if that means Thailand will finally surrender, but Sunun, who clarifies this is not about surrender. Thailand is only the beginning. Once the Thai market crashes, fear will ripple across Asia, emboldening the hedge funds already circling. Jonathan assumes their ultimate target must be Hong Kong, but Sunun, who corrects him. Their destination is Korea. Jonathan objects, pointing out that foreign funds can't even enter Korea without authorization. Sunun, who nods, he's right. But the weapon that strikes Korea won't be hedge funds, it will be fear itself. The kind of fear that forces foreign capital to flee overnight. Jonathan mutters that something monumental is coming, then asks what Sunun, who intends to do about it. No matter how brilliant he is, there's no stopping a tidal wave. Sunun, who admits he has no interest in stopping it. His goal is simple money. This war will be fought by an alliance of hedge funds, but when the dust settles, the world will see who truly profited. Their wager will be placed with 50-fold leverage, and Jonathan's mind reels at the implications. Sunun, who explains patiently, even if the market drops only 10%, the graph doesn't collapse in a straight line. It fluctuates up and down until fear pushes it off a cliff. That's why leverage amplifies both risk and reward. With 50 times leverage, a 1% drop equals a 50% loss. At 2%, everything vanishes. But if Jonathan trusts the data and follows the trend, the outcome will be beyond imagination. The future, Sunun, who says firmly, is in your hands now. Later, Jonathan sits in his office, weary and hungry, but resolute. Determination hardens within him as he prepares to see this plan through. When he finally returns to Korea, Sunun, who is taken aback, Jonathan looks just as striking as before, but this time he carries an even greater prize. Sunun, who asks if he managed to exchange the money into dollars. Jonathan confirms, trembling as he adds that it wasn't merely a 700% return. His voice cracks, and tears well in his eyes. They multiplied their $400,000 stake 700 times over. In just a single week, they had earned $280 million. They were obscenely, unthinkably rich. From his hotel, Jonathan calls his mother, casually saying he'll be staying at a friend's place. Meanwhile, Sunun, who inspects the trades and is staggered. Jonathan's moves had been nothing short of extraordinary. Jonathan, overwhelmed with joy, celebrates wildly. He can hardly believe it. They had gone all in on a single attempt and somehow succeeded. 2 men alone had just become a hedge fund powerful enough to rival giants. Sunun, who, however, keeps his composure. "If you're not going to sleep," he says calmly, "then let's talk about our next strategy." Jonathan wondered what kind of magical knowledge he was about to gain this time. Sununu explained that Thailand might soon adopt a floating exchange rate system. If they chose that day as their D-Day, they would pour all of their resources into the move and push their bet to the absolute limit. There would be no recovery rally during the crash, only a relentless downward spiral. No one would dare buy the dip. Jonathan remarked that it was obvious. Once Thailand implemented a floating exchange rate, it was essentially a declaration of surrender. Sununu then asked how much 200 million would amount to in such a scenario. Jonathan stared at him in disbelief. Was he really considering going all in with 200 million? Did he truly believe the hedge funds would sit back and do nothing? If they wagered that amount on the collapse of the bot, chaos was inevitable. Sununu replied calmly that they would leave only scraps for others. As he had said before, it would be them truly waging this war. Jonathan countered that if Sununu's D-Day prediction was even slightly off, they would lose everything. It was already reckless to want to gamble all of their funds. Such a move was beyond human. It was something only a god would dare. Smirking, Sunhu patted Jonathan on the shoulder. He reminded him that starting tomorrow, they needed to compile critical data, specifically the percentage of Thailand's foreign reserves they had already drained. Jonathan protested that information of that scale would not be easy to obtain, and even then, could Sunhu truly calculate with it? Sunhu responded that he only needed it to compare with the historical situation on July 2nd. To be cautious, they would reduce leverage and align it with July 1st. He added that $80 should be sufficient to open a channel with the governor of Thailand's central bank. Jonathan was stunned. "Are you really just 13 years old?" he asked. Sunhu, unfazed, told him he should take a trip to Bangkok. Jonathan muttered that one misstep there could get him shot on the spot. Sunhu, however, insisted that Thailand knew its defeat was inevitable. They had no choice but to prepare for the aftermath. For them, 1997 would become the ultimate payday, so they had to go all in. The next day, Jonathan nervously boarded a plane, his expression sharp and determined, like an awakeness stepping into a dungeon ready to conquer it. While Jonathan infiltrated enemy territory to gather intelligence, Sunhu had his own battles to fight. On the streets, he engaged in a brutal fight, snapping his opponent's arm. The man howled in agony as the strategist nearby muttered that he had warned him this boy was dangerous. Clutching his broken arm, the man snarled that he would not let this slide. Sunhu only smiled and replied, "Good." Later that night, he walked into a gathering of gang members. Many were unsettled by his presence, shocked that he had come willingly despite knowing he would be fighting multiple enemies. Sunhu explained that one-on-one combat was no longer enough to raise his stats, it was time to put something to the test. The gang lunged at him. He swiftly incapacitated 3 without taking a single blow. Just as victory seemed assured, one managed to slip through his defenses and nearly struck him. Sunhu pushed him back, but another still landed a hit from behind. Believing the fight over, the man who struck him threw his weapon aside only for Sunhu to grab him and slam him to the ground. This was the feeling he sought. Amidst the chaos, he could clearly perceive openings in the enemy's attacks. The system itself seemed to roar at him to unleash his abilities, but he refused to use Odin's wrath, not after witnessing its destructive power. From the sidelines, a biker watched the spectacle while smoking. "Feels like I'm watching a movie," he muttered before revving his engine and charging at Sunhu. With no time to dodge, Sunhu was thrown across the pavement by the impact. The biker ordered the others to finish him off. They obeyed, raining blows on him. The man with the broken arm demanded the final strike. As Sunhu struggled to rise, the man prepared to deliver a crushing kick. And in that moment, the skill man who overcomes adversity activated, instantly raising all of Sunhu's stats to E rank. The man frantically brandished his knife, shaken by the sight before him. But before he could make a move, Sunhu struck with precision, knocking him unconscious in an instant. Observing the sudden surge of strength coursing through him, Sunhu realized that this trait held immense power, though its unpredictability made it difficult to master. His stats had risen sharply, forcing him to quickly adjust. The biker glared menacingly at the group, and his companions charged straight at Sunhu. Turning swiftly, Sunhu delivered a devastating punch that sent one opponent flying several meters away. Another, intimidated by the display, hesitated as Sunhu extended his hand. Reluctantly, the man surrendered his weapon, only to be struck across the head moments later. Sunhu then set his sights on the biker. With a surge of energy, he invoked Odin's wrath. Lightning exploded violently, engulfing his foe in a storm of crackling power. The battle was over, leaving the others staring at him in stunned silence, questioning if he was even human. Later, at the hotel, Sunhu carefully analyzed his ability. He realized that it did not activate through self-inflicted harm, but rather only under the weight of external attacks, and only when he was truly pushed to the brink. It was risky, but without doubt, an incredibly powerful weapon. He knew this was the key he needed to stand against monsters, as well as the 8 devils and virtues. Soon after the day of beginnings, Sunhu received a call from overseas. Jonathan's voice came through, affirming Sunhu's suspicions. They had been waiting for this moment. From Jonathan's assessment, the funds extracted amounted to just over 20%, close enough to his earlier calculations. But Sunhu suspected Jonathan's words carried another meaning. He wasn't referring to Thailand's present situation as being close. Rather, he implied that Thailand's reserves of foreign currency were far greater than expected, making the outcome uncertain. Sunhu asked whether Jonathan had any objections to going all in. Jonathan dismissed the concern, reminding him that he had already spent $80 million just for access to classified documents. Still, he admitted that what Sunhu was attempting bordered on madness. Sunhu calmly declared that D-Day would fall on July 2nd, and they would enter the market with maximum leverage. Jonathan could only shake his head, warning that he was losing his sanity. If his calculations were correct, hedge funds like Dragon would inevitably respond. Sunhu agreed, noting that once a major player such as Dragon made its move, the rest of the financial world would follow in a chain reaction. It was no different from the 8 virtues and evils. Once the leaders struck, their factions descended into chaos alongside them. Jonathan concluded that if Sunhu's prediction was accurate, this single maneuver would draw in nearly every investment fund on Earth. But Sunhu only reassured him, insisting he was stronger than Jonathan believed. Instead of worrying, he urged Jonathan to focus on preparation. As July 1st arrived, the day Hong Kong returned to China history seemed to echo itself. A modern version of the Opium War was unfolding, not through ships or cannons, but through markets and currencies. Western investment funds flooded Asia, not with opium, but with vast sums of capital, destabilizing economies with financial warfare. Yet Sunhu knew the true spark behind the coming civil war in Asia. Before his regression, it had been ignited by an S-rank dungeon sealed within the region, commanded by one of the 8 virtues and his loyal followers. Restless, Sunhu refreshed his inbox repeatedly, frustrated at the absence of technology like pagers. With the 200 million at their disposal, their potential leverage stretched to nearly 10 billion in trade value. Yet a concern lingered. The futures market for foreign currency rarely exceeded 10 billion a day. Would there even be enough liquidity for their gamble to succeed? Then, the message arrived. Jonathan confirmed that preparations for the attack were complete. Sunhu likened the moment to standing at the entrance of a dungeon with a fully stocked pack. In the past, he would charge recklessly into danger, never guaranteed to come out alive. Now, he trembled not from fear of death, but from the anticipation of victory. For once, the points he had fought so bitterly for would not be squandered by fate's cruelty. He steadied himself. This was no time to grow complacent. Though less than a year had passed since his return, his former life of hardship and relentless battle already felt like a distant memory. Sunhu sent word back to Jonathan. His own preparations were complete. Together, they were about to clear a dungeon unlike any other. Later, as he sat in class, Sunhu glanced at the clock striking noon. He noted the 2-hour time difference between his location and Thailand, a reminder of how close the decisive moment had come. Within the next 30 minutes, the Bank of Thailand will officially announce its adoption of a floating exchange system. That moment will mark the true beginning. From what he remembers of his past life, the market will split into distinct camps, one betting on Thailand's surrender, another convinced they'll hold out until mid-July, and a third certain that Thailand will prevail. For these investors, it will be a decisive clash between fortune and ruin. But with Sunhu stepping into the game, there will be no wagers placed on Thailand's defeat. Every bet favoring the other outcome will inevitably flow into their hands. As he sits in class, the teacher notices him staring at the clock instead of his quiz. She walks over and asks why his attention is elsewhere. Sun, who smiles politely, apologizing and promising to focus on the test. Amused, she laughs and remarks that he speaks like an adult. Scratching his head, he mutters to himself that he has no memory of her from his original timeline. When the clock strikes 12:30, he quickly rises from his seat. Approaching the teacher, he explains that he isn't feeling well and wants to leave early. She sighs, noting this isn't the first time he's asked, but then points out that despite his excuses, he scored a perfect 100% on the quiz. Normally, he misses a few questions on purpose to avoid drawing attention, but this time he hadn't. She tells him he's clearly working hard and allows him to go. Still, before letting him leave, she asks whether he ever feels isolated since he spends so much time alone. Sun, who replies that solitude is simply his nature, nothing more. He thanks her for noticing and departs in a hurry. Most people can sense that he isn't quite normal, his teacher, who doesn't press him for answers, and even his parents, who ignore his $150 phone bill. Back at home, he waits impatiently before his computer, cursing the painfully slow internet. Soon, Jonathan logs on, and the two begin discussing the unfolding situation. Sun, who notes that the information site is frozen, though some scraps of data remain accessible. Jonathan takes a while to reply, but when he does, he reports that they've already run the numbers over 300 times. The figure is staggering, $60 billion. The shock nearly makes Sun, whose heart stop. Jonathan warns that resistance is growing stronger and urges him to secure profits before it's too late. Sun, who realizes his friend is practically analyzing the situation, as though speaking to their boss, emotions overflowing. For now, he reminds Jonathan that the plan hasn't changed, they'll settle when he gives the signal. With today's announcement, the tide will shift completely. As the market trembles, Jonathan reports a downturn. Watching billions vanish in real time makes Sun, whose hands tremble, but they have no choice but to push forward. He orders Jonathan to begin liquidating profits. In the financial war, the hedge fund union's primary weapon is the spot market, while futures traders play a supporting role absorbing risks when needed. But when they pour everything into futures with 50-fold leverage, the pressure becomes unbearable. Jonathan reports that their settlements are altering the entire market atmosphere. Sun, who can tell the timeline, is diverging, with the bot surging rapidly from 31 to 33 before falling again. Exhaustion weighs on both of them. Jonathan informs him that 80% of positions have been closed successfully, suggesting they leave the rest until expiry. While a reasonable move, Sun, who knows that isn't possible. Declaring the war finished, he instructs Jonathan to close everything and head to Korea immediately. By the time Jonathan arrives, news of the bot's collapse spreads like wildfire across Asia. He looks utterly drained, as though his soul barely made the trip. Sitting beside Sun, who he admits their returns are slightly less than expected, but Sun, who had already accounted for this. "How much did we make?" Sun, who asks. Jonathan slowly raises his hand, fingers forming the number 50 billion. The shock nearly makes Sun, who faint. Jonathan slumps back and mutters that he feels the same. Somehow, they had survived the storm. Sun, who advised that they should retreat for now and work together, reminding Jonathan that this was only the beginning of the Asian financial crisis. He explained that Malaysia and Indonesia would stay out of it, but Hong Kong would certainly take part. Jonathan's expression lit up at the news, and Sun, who told him that he needed a favor to start things off. There was a piece of land in Korea they needed to acquire. That night, Jonathan dreamed of being seized by a towering Sun, who, the image so vivid that he woke up screaming. A startled steward remarked that they had arrived at their destination, America. During a quiet drive, Jonathan reflected on the dream and scolded himself for being childish. His mind drifted back to his earlier conversation with Sun, who. He asked why he wanted to buy land. Was he planning to expand into real estate as well? Sun, who replied that real estate was only the beginning. From this day forward, they would venture into every kind of market that could bring them profit. Jonathan found it hard to believe how calm Sun Eunhoo remained, considering that 50 billion was no small sum. He asked if nothing bad could come of this. Sun Eunhoo, noticing his tension, urged him to eat and relax. He explained that Jonathan should first use his own shares as collateral to split up the company. If he wished to invest further, he could contribute as much as he wanted. Jonathan then asked how many companies he intended to divide into. Sun Eunhoo explained that the more complex the structure, the better. The goal was to make it impossible to trace ownership back to the source. Even employees within the companies wouldn't know what they were truly working for. Jonathan remarked that by creating so many ghost companies, it almost sounded as if Sun Eunhoo were planning a criminal enterprise. Sun Eunhoo simply replied that working alone was difficult, and once they reached Hong Kong, Jonathan should assemble a team. Grateful, Jonathan thanked him for recognizing how hard he had worked, recalling how he once had no time even to use the bathroom. But Sun Eunhoo clarified that skills didn't matter nearly as much as trust and loyalty. Jonathan assured him that if that was the case, he already had a few people in mind. Sun Eunhoo then explained that after they had results from Hong Kong, they should acquire 2 medium-sized investment firms, similar to the ones Jonathan had worked at. He told Jonathan to target the best talent available, someone like Jeffrey K. Jonathan was surprised by how ambitious that sounded, but he didn't mind the idea. Having someone like Jeffrey under his wing appealed to him. Sun Eunhoo explained that they would give these experts as much money as they wanted, but never allow them access to the company's true inner workings. Once the company split was complete, one branch would be named Janel. Through it, they would also purchase assets within this country. When Jonathan asked why the name Janel, Sun Eunhoo revealed that it was his father's name, and he looked forward to the day when he could proudly tell him about it. For now, though, he stressed, they needed to stay focused on work. A time would come when all the money in the world would be within their grasp. Jonathan silently agreed, realizing that Sun Eunhoo was right. Later, as he walked down a hallway, Jonathan thought again about what Sun Eunhoo had said. The first company should bear his own name, Jonathan Investment. That way, he would take the fame and recognition, a form of repayment for his efforts. Opening a door, he was greeted by a room full of people waiting for him. With confidence, he declared, "We've made it to the major leagues. Welcome, everyone, to Jonathan Investment." Meanwhile, Sun Eunhoo reflected on the nature of the financial world. He thought of a monster known as the Abyss Ant, a creature that traveled in endless swarms, devouring everything in its path. Always hungry, they reminded him of hedge funds and their backers, driven by insatiable greed. Reading an article, he realized that the money that should have originally belonged to others had instead fallen into his hands. History itself seemed to shift, growing more brutal and visceral. Surely, by now, others must have noticed that a single group had cornered the bot drop, monopolizing every last profit for themselves. His thoughts were interrupted by someone addressing him as President. He asked if there had been any changes to the contract terms. The man explained that Chairman Choi had agreed to the conditions. Known for building his fortune through real estate, Choi's reputation for reliability made him a trustworthy partner. The man began showing Sun Eunhoo around, and as he listened, Sun Eunhoo considered his own requirement. When renting an office space, there would be one very particular condition attached. A 2-year contract is signed under the condition that the full down payment is made in cash. Of course, it won't be registered under his real name. The entire arrangement is technically illegal, but both parties see it as mutually beneficial. The money will ultimately funnel into President Choi's hidden slush fund. The man presenting the property explains that it has already been cleaned, meaning all that remains is for Sun Eunhoo to bring in his belongings. Sun Eunhoo reflects that his decision to rent this office stemmed from 2 simple reasons: its tight security and the fact that it houses an ADLS terminal. At last, he will no longer be plagued by painfully slow internet speeds. He tells the man that he will pay the rent now, adding that removing 2 boxes should cover the full amount. Once left alone, Sun-un, muses that until Jonathan returns to Korea, he should focus on decorating the space. He pins up a sketch of a dog hybrid, remarking that this office will serve as his first outpost. Jonathan has already begun submitting reports on their progress, while he himself delegated the matter of separation to startup companies. 8 groups have been selected to advance to the next stage. Each time a milestone is reached, he switches companies. In doing so, the groups still debating the previous separations remain unaware of what's truly unfolding. For him, everything is about paperwork and results. Nearly 1,000 different tax codes must be calculated, and the associated commission fees are beyond comprehension. Despite that, it appears he will have to handle the fund distribution plan himself. He contacts Jonathan, asking about Jeffrey K., and Jonathan confirms that he's already on board. Sun, stresses that prediction remains their top priority, but insists that Jonathan remain aligned with CEO Donald Finn until the very end. Jonathan wonders aloud whether this isn't merely an investment ploy designed to trap Donald, and Sun, admits that he is right, it's not just about investment. The burst of the dot-com bubble caused a devastating collapse in market capitalization, but that isn't the true driving force here. The real turning point lies in the database language created back in the 1980s, which had since become the industry standard. That system incorporated everything: dungeons, monsters, skill attributes, and countless characteristics. Yet above all, the most critical program was tied to the Lee Sun's Guild, the revolutionary database at the heart of it all. Had he once possessed even a glimpse into that database, the war against the 8 virtues would have played out very differently. Sun, resolves that his interference this time will shape history itself. To succeed, however, he must keep fluctuations to an absolute minimum. He instructs Jonathan to focus on predictive models, so that Donald can be granted the highest recognition through salary increases and stock options. Even then, Donald may choose to walk away, leaving them with no leverage. Sun, steels himself, vowing to one day claim all the power the 8 virtues once held. While preparing to head out, he notices his mother watching the news. The broadcast discusses one of his ghost companies, though he assures himself there's no need for concern. Before leaving, he tells his mother he's stepping out. She reminds him to bring Jong-oh over sometime, since she's heard much about the man but never met him. Running his fingers through his hair, Sun, promises that he will. She then asks if he intends to keep boxing. He tells her he can stop if it worries her, but she strokes his cheek gently and reassures him. She isn't concerned, rather, she's proud of his perseverance. He's free to pursue whatever he desires. With her blessing, he departs, thinking he'll need to gather some pocket money soon. Arriving at the building where he had leased the floor, he pauses upon seeing several men from a public bank waiting for the elevator. His office occupies the first floor of the same building, which also houses Korea's #1 bank equipped with the latest online network. Clearly, this elevator is shared between clients and staff. As they ride together, Sun, listens to the bankers boast about their ventures and the fortunes they've amassed. One of them smugly wonders aloud if their predictive abilities make them gods. Another adds that there's no movement in the Philippines, Malaysia, or Singapore, only Hong Kong remains as a viable target. A superior then orders someone to retrieve the morning files, declaring that Hong Kong must be their next objective if they wish to rival those 2 mysterious strangers. Hearing this, Sun, can't help but smirk. As he steps out of the elevator, he thinks to himself that they'll never catch up. By now, everything has already splintered into countless ghost companies, leaving them chasing shadows. Later, Jonathan arrives at his office, only to notice that it resembles a gym more than a workplace. He throws a few punches at the equipment and tries to exercise, but ends up injuring himself, much to Sun-un's disappointment. Jonathan also notices several swords lined up in the office and casually asks if Sun even knows how to use them. Sun shifts the subject, asking for the materials he had requested. Jonathan hands him the list of paper companies, remarking that the setup is incredibly complex. Over 1,000 ghost companies are listed. He warns that if this book were ever lost, they wouldn't even be able to calculate how much money was inside. Sunun, who, however, is unfazed, he explains that losing it wouldn't disrupt the flow of funds and insists that money can resolve any issue. Everything they are doing, he says, exists solely to generate more wealth. He asks Jonathan if he can keep the original list, and Jonathan agrees. Opening a vault, Sunun, who instructs him from now on to avoid corporate cards entirely and instead use only cash, like a true billionaire, he tells Jonathan to take the rest of the day off, and they will meet again tomorrow morning. Jonathan suggests they could meet in the afternoon, but Sunun, who replies that he should treat it as a short vacation. As Jonathan prepares to leave, his eyes catch the drawings on the wall and he smiles, remarking that they prove Sunun, who is still just a kid at heart. Meanwhile, at Dprump, one of the big 4 banks in North America, Emily from Jonathan Investment meets with a representative to propose a deal. The banker recognizes it as the new swap transaction circulating in the market, but dismisses it, saying no one would realistically accept such an offer. Emily insists he take a closer look, pointing out that Jonathan Investment is listed as Party B. The man is momentarily shocked, but then stifles a laugh, saying the decision isn't his to make. He'll call in the person actually in charge. The senior executive reviews the proposal carefully. He notes that accepting it would cause Hong Kong's interest rates to skyrocket, while Jonathan Investment's revenue would plummet. Curious, he asks how much they're asking for. Emily replies, $500 million. The man can hardly contain his laughter. It seems absurd, even reckless, to imagine interest rates hitting 100%. Yet after reviewing the contract multiple times and finding no fraud, he concludes that $500 million is no trivial amount. They shake hands and agree to sign, though both silently hope they will never have to meet again. Later, Jonathan sits with Sunun, and declares that all preparations for the attack are complete. He places a bold wager of $5 billion, all in. Sunun, responds confidently, saying that once Debshire is finished, it will be his turn to strike. 2 months earlier, in October, Sunun, who had arrived at Jonathan's office looking exhausted and disheveled, dragging piles of trash with him. He asked how much he had lost. Jonathan replied that he must already know, though even he couldn't calculate it exactly. The global stock market outside of Asia had been trending slightly upward, and betting against it without official notices made it nearly impossible to keep track. Sunun, remarked that even if he had to, it would be painful to witness the kind of destruction heading for the market. Jonathan stared at his screens with a grim expression, regretting that he had trusted everything to Sunun, predictions. He recalled when Sunun, told him that interest rates had been raised to 300%, warning that Hong Kong would end up collapsing its own stock market. Jonathan didn't even want to imagine such a scenario, but knowing Sunun, he feared it was true. He asked why Hong Kong would ever resort to such madness. Sunun, calmly replied that it was the only way to eliminate the traitors. Jonathan asks if they're really planning to give up so easily. He reflects on how Hong Kong and Japan stand as the financial fortresses of Asia. The market he truly wants to conquer is Japan, but he knows that if he were to make a wrong move there, the Japanese authorities would not remain idle. That leaves only one viable target: Korea. Sunun, confirms this, recalling how Korea once implemented strict financial policies that completely blocked foreign investment and interference. This was why the trade war devastated Southeast Asia, spreading fear like wildfire. Even Hong Kong was attacked, but it never had a chance of standing against Korea and was eventually consumed by panic. Korean investors, overwhelmed by fear, rushed to withdraw, forcing foreign banks to call back their money rather than issue loans to companies. That chain reaction caused Korea to collapse from within. Fear, after all, is the quickest path to a nation's financial ruin. Once it spreads, traders pull out long-term investments, accelerating the downfall. But this time, Sun Who declares things will be different. He takes a seat, startling Jonathan. Sun Who suggests targeting the Hong Kong stock market, directly pouring fuel on the fire. 100 million, a billion console network, heavy industry, all of it. Hong Kong's stock prices are falling across nearly every sector, except the banks. He insists they must find a way to stabilize those. Jonathan warns that too many investors are beginning to follow their lead. Sun Who replies that if they're caught, this entire operation could collapse. It's still too early to draw conclusions, but for now, the New York company must be protected at all costs. Suddenly, Jonathan leaps from his seat and rushes off. Sun Who considers the situation. Either traders are closing in on Hong Kong, or opportunists want a share of what they're building. Jonathan declares that the trade has begun. Sun Who congratulates him, remarking that now they'll finally see who's really following them. Individual traders may hesitate, but trading firms are another matter entirely. Now the question remains, which side will it be? Placing his hand over his mouth, Sun Who silently hopes for the best. If they truly bring down Hong Kong with their own hands, history will be rewritten and the future will become impossible to predict. Suddenly, a green light flashes from the screen. Both men collapse back into their seats, utterly exhausted from the ordeal. Joan curses under his breath, saying the Hong Kong market nearly collapsed entirely. Sun Who insists they organize everything before the market closes. Today's trade, he says, was enough to make them sweat an entire river. He straightens his clothes, preparing to leave, and thanks God nothing catastrophic happened. All that's left now is to wait for the Hong Kong authorities. But just then, Jonathan screams for him and drops to his knees. He was wrong, Sun Who was wrong. Meanwhile, at Rebirth headquarters, the executives sit around a table, laughing hysterically at Jonathan Investment's latest move. 100% interest rate? Who could think of such madness? One mocks. The man in the purple suit asks how much they requested, and the bald man replies, 500 million. Both men are shocked but impressed, congratulating him for securing such a deal. The general manager of Rebirth, Clive, reflects quietly. He had expected to be fired after the devastating losses in Thailand, but now he feels renewed confidence and he owes it to Jonathan. As news about Hong Kong breaks, the executives turn their eyes to the screen. Clive's expression darkens, sinking deeper into despair. Hong Kong's interest rate skyrockets by 400%. The office erupts into chaos. Clive stares blankly, replaying the deal in his mind. By all logic, Jonathan Investment should have lost money. But with the interest soaring to 400%, their $500 million investment has now multiplied fourfold. In Seoul, Jonathan and Sun Who celebrate triumphantly. Their gamble has not only shaken Hong Kong, but also triggered collapses across global stock markets. Spot charts, futures, all of them are crashing. Sun Who observes that they are raking in staggering profits, watching the Asian financial crisis ripple outward like falling dominoes. This, he declares, is the second Black Monday stock markets plummeting worldwide, including Europe. And once again, they've struck the jackpot. They both celebrated instantly. In this era, such adversity and sudden fortune were often dismissed as fraudulent, but the power of money they controlled was far greater than any doubt. Jonathan quickly rose to become an immensely popular figure in the trading world, with many even hailing him as the god of investment. During training, Sun Who received a call from Jonathan. Jonathan revealed that they had been added to the billionaire list, a platform where people could exaggerate their wealth if they wished. Yet, the estimation of their fortune was remarkably close to the truth. Sun Who jokingly asked if those in charge were part of the IRS, warning that their identities must remain hidden. Jonathan assured him that it would be disastrous if anyone ever uncovered the truth. For now, all that was known publicly was that 51% of Jonathan Investment's stake belonged to an unknown figure under the name John Doe. Sun Who asked whether this meant that everyone on Wall Street was aware of this. Jonathan promised to do everything in his power to protect his identity. explaining that he had already hired top experts for that very reason. Sunhoo pressed further, asking just how close the IRS might be to discovering them. Jonathan calmly replied that they had monopolized Thailand and even outperformed the world's largest banks in wagers, so, in his view, nothing was impossible. He went on to explain that the New York branch of their company was valued at around $22 billion, which placed Jonathan's net worth at approximately $11.2 billion, while Sunhoo's was around $10.7 billion. Together, they ranked 18th and 20th on the billionaire list. Sunhoo remarked that fortune truly seemed to favor them. Jonathan added that if the vast sums siphoned from ghost companies were adjusted for inflation, they would easily occupy the first and second positions globally. Later, while walking along a busy street, Sunhoo noticed the weary faces of countless businessmen. He reflected on how, just 1 week after the Hong Kong incident, the Korean government had turned to the imp for a bailout 2 weeks earlier than in the previous timeline. With a sigh, he remembered how only his homeroom teacher had ever mentioned such a possibility, though no young student had cared to listen. But then again, he too had once been like them. Who was he to judge? As he entered a building, a man greeted him with a good morning, commenting that he resembled a colleague. Sunhoo immediately suspected the man was part of the foreign exchange division of the People's Bank. The man had never recognized Jonathan, despite running into him repeatedly over the past few months. Given how chaotic everything had been, this was understandable. Still, Sunhoo decided it was best not to get involved and coldly ignored him, leaving the man visibly displeased. Inside the building, a woman sat reading a newspaper while several men sneaked shy glances at her. Sunhoo approached and asked if she was Miss Jane. She confirmed and asked if he was the interviewer she had been waiting for. They sat at a table, and Sunhoo handed her a business card bearing the name Ethan. Jane looked at him curiously, asking whether he was evaluating her for her looks, or if he was more interested in sizing up the competition. Sunhoo explained that if this were merely an interview, he would never have given her his card. Their decision to hire her had already been made. He added that her past was irrelevant. What mattered now was her history and her appearance in Wilshire. They needed a beautiful, capable Asian woman with expertise in real estate to represent them, and soon she would understand why her image was so important. In the past, Wilshire had employed Jane as their chief investment officer in Asia. She had been both a strategist and a bullet catcher, someone who could transform negative perceptions into positive ones. However, her willingness to commit illegal acts for her own advancement was also well known. Her criminal record was notorious in the financial world. Though once a CEO and major shareholder, her downfall came when she was caught embezzling from her former employers. She had served time in prison for it. But for Sunhoo, that was precisely what made her valuable. He had been searching for someone like her since August. Jane admitted she had yet to hear the company's name. With a faint smile, Sunhoo told her, "John Investment." Some time later, a news outlet reported on a historic political event, the first transfer of power between government and opposition parties. It was a monumental moment, but the new presidential candidate now bore the immense responsibility of reviving the struggling economy. At a press conference held at the Blue House, the candidate proudly announced that Janel Investment had pledged a massive $15 billion investment. Watching the broadcast, Sunhoo smiled. To him, it was clear that the presidential candidate had essentially invited them to play a pivotal role in overcoming the foreign exchange crisis. Jane enters the room quietly through the fire exit, dressed elegantly to conceal her identity. Sunhoo congratulates her, remarking that she has quickly become the most sought-after figure in the country's political and business circles. Pulling off her disguise, Jane sharply tells him not to mention it again. He hands her the company card, advising her to always keep cash in the linked account, since he won't be able to track detailed reports of her spending. Jane simply smiles at this blatant embezzlement, which convinces Sunhoo even more that he chose the right person for the job. He asks how she intends to handle recruiting new employees. Jame responds by asking if she has complete freedom to proceed as she wishes. Sun, who reminds her that they had agreed to provide free management within the capital's limits, while his only direct involvement would be with the special orders. Jame explains that some of her former colleagues will be arriving later that evening, and she has already secured negotiations with several real estate advisory firms in the country. Additionally, she has enlisted Sam Wu Accounting and Kim and Park Law Firm, both of which will bring in professionals who can resolve most of their issues. Cho Duan will serve as the accounting director, while Park Chung-sik will oversee legal matters. Impressed, Sun, who comments that these are some of the most respected names in the business world and agrees they are excellent choices. Jame adds that the next step is securing office space. She points out that this very building is up for sale, and its value continues to drop. Sun, who explains that much of the rent was recently withdrawn, and not long ago Jame had a meeting with the Blue House to carry out the special orders he gave her. As a result, the real estate market has opened up earlier than expected. He compares it to a fire sale, like selling off the remains of a burned house at bargain prices, only this situation is even worse. Jame admits that real estate is her true specialty, but she cannot shake the thought that putting everything solely into real estate would be unwise. Such opportunities are rare, and she wonders if his clients are also interested in real estate investments. Sun, who tells her that the only thing that matters is the rate of return. He doesn't care whether the profits come from real estate or elsewhere, but warns that great returns also bring heavy responsibility. James smiles confidently, promising that the returns will be substantial. In this country, she says, anyone with dollars could rise to the position of chairman. She adds that through this, they can expand their influence into other companies as well. Sun, who, however, thinks to himself that if foreign investors seize a major stake in the nation's largest corporations, the losses would outweigh the benefits. Jane gazes at him, remarking that this country is truly remarkable for business. She had always known that, but now she admires it even more. Grateful for the chance he has given her, she promises to show him results that will never contradict his wishes. Sun, who remains silent, simply watching her. That silence triggers James' memory of reviewing the special orders when she had spare time. The real estate options he wanted her to secure initially did not yield the kind of returns he had anticipated. She starts to elaborate further, but Sun, who cuts her off. While he appreciates her enthusiasm, he tells her firmly to stop. He explains that he will seldom interfere with Janelle's investments and trusts her to live up to their clients' expectations. However, her job is to follow the special orders, not to evaluate them. Under his stern gaze, Jane begins to tremble and apologizes for letting her excitement get the better of her. Sun, who reassures her that he understands, but advises that if she intends to expand using company funds, she should rely on the loan department. The special order he gave her was straightforward: to make a purchase. Money, he says, is important, but there are things far more valuable. Meanwhile, Sun, who makes his way to a hill where he recalls how long it took to locate and purchase the dungeon. When he first came here, it looked entirely different. In his original timeline, the site resembled a military installation. At that time, the government still held immense power, and the hills along with their dungeons were firmly under state control. Martial law had even been reinstated. Survivors from the examination rooms were known as reservists, but instead of freedom, they were taken to government research facilities treated less like people and more like test subjects. When he first laid eyes on the dungeon entrance, he realized they were in far worse condition than test subjects in a laboratory. Just then, a car pulled up behind him, and a man named Choi Chilman stepped out. Sun-un, who introduced himself as a representative of John Investment, handing over a business card under yet another false identity. They continued driving further up the mountain, where Choi asked where exactly the construction site was. Sun-un, who explained that from the very base of the hill, the entire surrounding area was considered part of the project site. He added that construction should begin right at the entrance, and the restoration should preserve as much originality as possible. After about 20 minutes of climbing, the truck gave out, unable to go any higher. They stepped out of the vehicle, and Sunun, who asked if Choi was capable of handling building construction as well. Choi assured him that he could take on any project he wasn't particular. Pressing further, Sunun, who asked if he could also build a road, and whether he could realistically manage all of this, since work needed to begin immediately despite the challenges of winter and the sheer scale of the project. Choi paused, weighing the enormity of the request, leveling a mountain, carving a road, erecting buildings. Yet in such a difficult economy, work was scarce. He couldn't afford to pass up this opportunity. With determination, Choi agreed. As they climbed back into the car, Sunun, who told him to prepare an estimate of both cost and completion time as soon as possible. Although he would be reaching out to other companies for quotes, he emphasized that he truly wanted Choi to take on the project. Puzzled, Choi asked why he was being singled out. Sunun, who glanced at the photos of his daughter, saying quietly that these were hard times for fathers everywhere. Moved to tears, Choi thanked him for his kindness. Later that night, Sunun, whose father stumbled home drunk. It was the final day of the year, and as always, the occasion brought back memories. In the past, this was the very day his father had been forced into early retirement, a symbolic death sentence for a man still young. But this time, things were different. His father, flushed with excitement, announced that he would soon be joining a major firm, Jonal Investment, carrying with him its prestigious name. Sunun, who scratched his cheek in disbelief. He hadn't expected this in the slightest. He recalled how his father had first drawn him into the financial world. Back in high school, he was handed a bank book containing $1 million of fortune for a student. In the aftermath of the IMF crisis, even amateurs could profit, and before long, Sunun, who had become a successful teenage trader. His fortune was such that he even asked his father for more capital, which he provided. But it didn't take long for disaster to strike. When the US.com bubble collapsed, half his earnings vanished. Around the same time, his father demanded the money back within a week. The loss devastated him, and he wept, unable to repay what he owed. Coldly, his father told him to borrow from his mother if necessary, because he truly needed the money. Shocked, Sunun, who asked how he could possibly do that. His father warned that if he refused, he'd have to pay through his allowances, along with his CD player, phone, and computer, but even those wouldn't cover the full debt. He insisted that Sunun, who approach his mother, reminding him that despite thinking himself grown, he was still a child. If he behaved, she would likely lend him the money. His father then confessed he wished Sunun, who understood the pain of losing his job, and hoped he would take as much interest in the economy itself as he did in stock trading. Still, he added, the hardship his son faced wasn't even a fraction of what he had felt the day he was dismissed. Once a career path is chosen, the direction of one's life becomes set, and for him, his very first stock certificate had become a kind of lucky charm. Construction soon began, with President Choi securing the job. The project gave him a renewed sense of confidence and patience. Yet not everyone was pleased. Local villagers grew anxious about the sudden changes in their mountain. As they drove together, Sunun, who remarked that he wanted to build a village meeting hall to ease their concerns. Choi dismissed the idea, saying he had already spoken with the village head and everything was fine. But Sunun, who reminded him that the villagers had once gathered mushrooms and kept bees in the mountain. Choi, unfazed, noted that they had done so without official permission. Regardless, Sunun, who concluded firmly that access to the mountain would soon be cut off by fencing the entire base with wire mesh. Choi was taken aback by the suggestion, but Sunun, who calmly explained that no one except the villagers would be allowed into the mountain. This was a safeguard in case anyone stumbled upon the dungeon. He added that since the company was foreign, certain matters were not so easily negotiated. He then asked Choi to manage the villagers' sentiment toward the situation. Though hesitant, Choi eventually agreed. Sunun, who reminded him that in matters of this scale, force alone could not achieve results. It required careful persuasion and proper handling. Elsewhere, Jonal Investments accounting director, Jo Duan, shared drinks with the Judicial Affairs director, Park Chung-sik. They spoke about the company's future and their own roles within it. Duan stressed that they couldn't afford to take breaks and insisted that Park should have consulted him directly before moving forward with any major decision. Park laughed it off, but Duan reassured him that they were in the same boat now. Both agreed and raised their glasses in a toast to Jonal Investments. Duan then noted that Kim Chilman, being the chief, was too valuable to simply discard as a bargaining chip. Park brought up that the yellow hair introduced by the late representative director had already been blocked, so following their own course would be difficult. Even if they involved Chilman, it would still be a high-risk, low-reward move. If they exercised patience, however, Chilman might soon deliver results that would appeal to Western investors. Glancing at the car keys before him, Duan remarked that if everything went well, it could lead to major opportunities. Park asked if such cases had happened before, and Duan responded with cynicism, saying that the group was rotten from the inside out. Nothing substantial could come from it anyway. Still, even if the VIPs continued acting out, he would allow them one exemption, splitting benefits with the chief and filling Western investors' pockets with cash. The two clinked glasses again, agreeing that by the next term, everything should be secured. In January 1998, many companies across the country collapsed. Massive restructuring plans from large corporations triggered waves of unemployment. Sunun, who reflected that not much had changed, except for certain details. For instance, DP Crump and the German bank did not make their entry until the second quarter of the year. The reason was clear: they had suffered significant losses in earlier bets. Desperate, they had planned to enter the Korean market in the first quarter to squeeze out as much profit as possible, since the entire country was essentially being sold off at rock-bottom prices. Sunun, who could predict this much, but he never expected to actually succeed. News soon arrived that the chairman of Daeos had been arrested. Among Korea's top 3 conglomerates, Daeon, Daewoo, and Ilsung Daewoo ranked second financially, stronger than Ilsung and highly respected overseas. They owned around 400 subsidiaries worldwide, with 100,000 employees in Korea and twice as many abroad. Jane turned to Sunun and asked if he knew of the Daewoo Group. He confirmed that he did. She then revealed that an arrest warrant had been issued for its chairman. Shocked, Sunun asked what could have possibly caused this. James explained that the group's collapse wasn't solely due to the IMF crisis. The full implosion of problems within Daewoo wouldn't have happened for another 2 years. So why target a company still operating normally? Why now? She revealed that the first 2 directors Daewoo had hired after their CEO's appointment, Cho Dae-won and Park Chun-sik, had since entered politics. Both were considered popular figures and were placed strategically to serve him. At first, James struggled to make sense of these developments, but now she understood the workings of the system. Thanks to this, the Daewoo Group was added to the list. Sunun reflected that corruption was universal. In North America, lobbying had simply been legalized and brought into the open, but at its core, it was no different. He warned James not to view it with too much bias. However, he admitted that Korea was unique in its constant use of the word conglomerate. Apologizing for interrupting her, he encouraged her to continue, adding that even his clients would be pleased to see Daewoo included. James then explained that the decision to make Daewoo the scapegoat of the IMF crisis came from the 2 directors themselves, since there had been no precedent of anyone else directly taking the blame for global criticism. Daewoo was chosen. Sunun shook his head, saying he never imagined the authorities would approve such a move so easily. James remarks that this is precisely why she has decided to get involved as well. Soon, they will finally have the opportunity to meet with the leader of the financial world. Sun smirks, thinking that this must be the very moment that led to Daeos's dissolution. He recalls how, in the trials, the survival rate of the educated upper class used to be relatively high. Even during peaceful times, there were always people strategizing, plotting how to strike for their own gain, and how to bring down those stronger than themselves. Watching these individuals now, everything seems to fall perfectly into place. He notes that both Jaime and the directors are truly remarkable. Jaime explains that the material concerning due, which the government once held, has now been handed over to the court. Sun, who asks what the demands were. She clarifies that they seek an investment of at least $500 million and the acquisition of the due group in its entirety, including all liabilities. However, she adds that with more effort, it would be possible to target only the main subsidiary. Sun, who reflects that Jaime still needs time to fully grasp the intricacies of Korea's political and financial systems. He predicts that the next ruling authority will be the Democratic cabinet. If only one side profits after things have progressed this far, conflict with the authorities will be inevitable. And once the financial crisis begins to ease, a far more thorough tax investigation is certain to follow. He explains that the two Korean directors are not interested in assets or sales figures. Their true aim is to keep due ranked among the top 3 conglomerates not merely in reputation, but in infrastructure and influence. Sun, who then asks Jaime if she truly believes she can manage the due group, and whether she intends to bring in overseas management specialists after the takeover. Caught off guard, Jaime admits that had been her plan. Sun, who advises her instead to investigate the new chairman of the group, beginning with the current board members and the chairman's closest aides, though excluding family. Jaime recognizes this advice mirrors what the directors had told her. She then asks if this means he permits the takeover to proceed. Sun, who warns her not to rush. They are the clients in this matter, and she need not worry about additional investments or the company's direction. What she must ensure, he stresses with a piercing glare, is to act aggressively. Land, buildings, or the company itself, none of it must be allowed to slip away. Giant investment will, and must, monopolize Korea's crisis. Meanwhile, Jonathan steps off a plane, immediately swarmed by countless reporters. Exhausted by the flashing lights and constant questions, he endures the chaos until one reporter bluntly asks where he should invest his money to get rich. The other journalists ridicule the question, but Jonathan actually finds it amusing. He replies that if he were to invest in only one thing, it would be fear. Sun, who, holding a paper with Jonathan's quote, mocks him relentlessly. Irritated, Jonathan demands that he stop acting childish. Sun, who comments that his welcome was nothing short of spectacular. Jonathan admits he barely managed to escape the frenzy and hadn't expected to be treated like a state guest. Handing him a beer, Sun, who remarks that this only proves how desperate the country truly is. Jonathan, however, remains optimistic, pointing out that IMF financial aid has already arrived and that he is channeling millions into the system. Sun, who agrees, noting that Korea will likely recover from the IMF crisis sooner than anticipated. Jonathan then presses him, asking whether he truly intends to move forward with his plan. Sun, who assumes he is referring to the due situation. He clarifies that while the idea wasn't originally his, it has gradually taken form and become part of his strategy. When Jonathan asks if they are connected to Junil's investment, Sun, who confirms it. He explains that he only placed the blade in their hands, and from there, they began striking on their own. Jonathan then questions whether Sun, whose ultimate goal is to seize control of the entire due group. Sun, who responds that it is a possibility, but emphasizes that restructuring will be unavoidable and the subsidiaries will require immediate attention. Jonathan points out that the approach feels backward and asks why Sun, who would pursue such a risky method. Sun, who calmly replies that the dollar cannot sustain the economy indefinitely. Once Korea overcomes the IMF crisis and regains stability, this strategy will act as preparation for that future. Jonathan acknowledges the depth of Sun, whose commitment to his country, realizing that his motivations extend beyond personal profit. He tells Sun who that, in time, his true intentions will be revealed. Jonathan also reassures him that there is no reason to be ashamed of such patriotism, reminding him that he already possesses more than enough wealth to live as he chooses. At that moment, Sun, who declares $1 billion, He demands an additional billion on top of the original $1.5 billion, bringing the total investment to $2.5 billion. He insists this amount will align with the timeline of the due acquisition. Jonathan begins to sweat and warns him to reconsider, fearing this could ultimately lead to a 1,000-year prison sentence. He argues that they cannot afford to jeopardize the trust they've already secured because, if the authorities wish to, they can always uncover evidence. But Sun Who cuts him off, reminding him that it is the Korean government that is in a hurry, not them. Rising from his seat, he emphasizes that this is their chance to legitimize the entire $2.3 billion. Jonathan asks how the Korean government could possibly cooperate in such a scheme. Sun Who dismisses the concern, saying it is for the government to resolve. All they need to do is present the numbers. Jonathan smirks and takes a sip of his beer. He marvels at the audacity using an entire nation as a tool for laundering. Soon after, the Do Group enters a debt workout following a thorough tax investigation. Contrary to expectations, there is no mass resignation at the executive level. Aside from the chairman's family, most employees remain in their positions. At school, Sun Who asks James about the progress of the takeover. She mentions that there are competitors, but assures him not to worry. Once they secure the windscreen contracts, they will gain the advantage. Amused, he praises her for using such a sophisticated word. James then brings up the allocation of liabilities, but he dismisses the topic, suggesting they revisit it later. He believes the Do business is nearly resolved. Turning to the men he had previously beaten, he orders them to get up. They obey immediately. He warns them not to interfere with him again if they wish to avoid further conflict. They agree, and Sun Who releases them, realizing he cannot rely on such people for training anyway. Scratching his head, he wonders how he will handle his school obligations this time. Just then, his homeroom teacher leans out of the window and urges him to come inside. Once in the classroom, she explains that his classmates don't actually dislike him, they're simply afraid. He finds this strange, as he distinctly remembers her being a different person during this time period, though until now he had brushed it aside as unimportant. Lately, however, her behavior has started to trouble him. She tells him that if he would just make the first move, he would discover that school can actually be enjoyable. Despite the obvious falsehood, she presses him to promise that he will at least graduate from middle school. This takes Sun Who by surprise, convincing him that he needs to investigate further. Later in class, Sun Who reflects that he has already hired private detectives to look into his homeroom teacher. Her name is Woo Yeonhae, a 22-year-old born in Seoul. The eldest daughter of an unremarkable family, she has little interest in fashion, maintains minimal social activity, and doesn't even have a close friend she regularly contacts. Up until now, she appeared to be nothing more than a regular teacher, quiet, reserved, and not particularly social. Yet two details stood out as unusual. The first was that she already knew of him beforehand and seemed strangely interested in seemingly random people. It wasn't exactly unsettling, but it was eccentric. The real concern was that he happened to be one of the individuals she was curious about. From the beginning, she had been aware of him, and after passing the employment test, she deliberately worked hard to become his homeroom teacher. The second detail was her history of psychiatric treatment. The prescriptions she had received were fairly standard medications typically used to treat depression or anxiety, yet she continued to complain of the same symptoms. Over time, this caused her to slowly lose contact with her family. The problem was that the medicine was useless, because her so-called delusions and hallucinations dismissed as senseless ramblings were, in fact, real. Sun Who never expected to encounter an awakened individual this way, let alone a rare mind healer. That night, while sitting in his office, he reflected that mind healers were considered rare, not only because of their abilities, but also because so few survived after awakening. Their powers allowed them to influence the minds of others without uttering a single word. Yet, after enduring the trial of awakening, Most were driven into despair and ultimately could not withstand the overwhelming fatigue that plagued awakened survivors. For Yana, awakening so early had made the burden even heavier. Sun, who was certain there was a grim reason her name had vanished from records in this era. Just then, he received a call from Jonathan, who informed him that the task was complete, adding that as a Texan, he could be stubborn. They ended the call, and Sun, who found himself relieved that Jonathan had pulled through. A few days earlier, Jonathan had handed him a set of documents. At first glance, it felt less like a bold plan and more like a retirement strategy. When Sun, who voiced his concerns, Jonathan defended it, explaining that it was better to aim for stability than to take reckless risks right now. Sun, who admitted that investing in the Dow index wasn't a bad idea, but it wasn't particularly impressive either. The proposed portfolio totaled just $1 billion, and considering how much they had already accumulated, it seemed underwhelming. By his own estimate, their earnings should have exceeded $3 billion. Jonathan, however, insisted the total was closer to $6.5 billion, and even if they stopped completely, the fortune would continue to grow endlessly. Sun, who wanted to respond but chose to remain silent, avoiding mention of a certain person. Jonathan speculated aloud, wondering if Sun, whose real target was the so-called god of finance, a legendary figure with estimated assets of $50 quadrillion, who had even founded a nation and altered the course of the World War. But Sun, who dismissed that idea. He thought to himself that his decision to regress into this era had little to do with numbers or statistics. If it were only about that, he would not have gone so far back. When Jonathan asked again about his objective, Sun, who replied that he had none, he was simply hungry for more. Jonathan chuckled, admitting that it was a good line. Sun, who told him to keep it in mind and use it for a client someday. Jonathan asked what client he meant, and Sun, who reminded him of the merger between smaller investment companies. Jonathan stayed silent, which irritated Sun, who snapped at him, demanding that he reject all interviews and public appearances. If Jonathan overextended himself, it would only serve as a distraction. Jonathan explained that it wasn't an excuse, but he simply disliked having people more talented than himself working under him. He feared that if they were too close, they would eventually recognize this fact. He insisted that Sun, who should take the lead instead. But Sun, who refused, he already knew why he could not be the one standing at the front. He should finally believe in himself for once. Even if they had never crossed paths, he would still have found success. Jonathan responds that not on this level, though, and apologizes, explaining that he has been under a lot of stress recently, but Sunun, who should already know that. Sunun, who reminds him that this is exactly why he advised him to exercise, pointing out that his stomach has grown larger. A strong body leads to a strong mind, and it is time for him to stop shrinking back. He should seize this opportunity to show others what he is truly capable of. Sunun, who adds that once the company expands, he will come to understand it fully. Yet Jonathan still wallows in self-pity, unable to awaken the beast he holds within. Sunun, who presses further, asking if he knows that the most influential people at Bluestone are currently in Korea. Jonathan reflects on the company recognized as the largest private placement investment firm in the world and wonders if Sunun, who intends to take them over. Sunun, who denies this, explaining that even during the Asian financial crisis, if Bluestone had taken damage, things still would have stabilized. But now, a new opening has appeared. Bluestone Capital Partners, the BCP3 fund. Jonathan remarks that Sunun, who must be some sort of genius to know all of this, and he confirms that Bluestone is pouring every resource into growing their product. Sunun, who explains that without the members stationed in Korea, Bluestone's new fund would be worthless. If Jonathan shakes their foundations from the bottom, he can surely prevail. With this, Jonathan agrees to join him. While the Bluestone group itself is attractive, what Sunun, who truly desires, is their subsidiary, Blue Rock. 20 years from now, Kim Chong-soo, Gillen, and Jessica will work together to transform Blue Rock, a plain asset management company, into something remarkable. In their prime, they will manage funds exceeding $4 trillion. Sun-Un, who smirks, noting that for now Blue Rock is insignificant, and will remain so because the shadow bank that secretly influences the global economy will ultimately fall under someone else's control. While on a plane, Sun-Un, who thinks about how his parents believe he has gone to Bible school, when in reality he is using it as a cover to travel to America and handle certain matters. His goals are twofold: to recruit Gillen and Jessica before they align with Blue Rock, and to find the brilliant analyst Kim Chong-soo, who is currently being suppressed and overlooked. At the private investigation firm Zopi, he meets John Clark, the investigator assigned to his case. They shake hands, and Sun-Un, who conceals his real identity under the name Eden. As they sit down, John explains that he heard Eden is managing a trust fund and is seeking a beneficiary. Sun-Un, who confirms this, while reflecting that if one seeks missing persons, blood ties must be proven, and if one seeks a fugitive, some form of connection to the case is required. But locating a trust fund beneficiary is far less complicated. For now, keeping the matter legal is best. He states that the person he is searching for is Bobby, born in Brooklyn, around 12 to 15 years old, and most likely still residing in New York. John asks if he has any additional details. Sun-Un, who admits that he only has a vague description of Bobby's appearance. All other records were lost. John points out that the information is far too limited, meaning the search would require significant time and money. In fact, it is like asking to search all of North America. Sun-Un, who acknowledges this, but insists that money is no obstacle. The beneficiary's payout will cover any expenses, so John should use as much manpower as necessary without hesitation. Clenching his fists, Sun-Un, who vows that he must find Bobby at all costs, the leader of the 8 evils, destined to become known as the first evil in New York. At Jonathan Investment, Sun-Un, who introduces Gillen to Jonathan, entrusting him with offshore funds amounting to roughly $1.5 billion. Jonathan is taken aback, finding it rather unexpected. Even with strong backing, someone like Gillen must truly be extraordinary. Sun-Un, who assures him that soon enough he will see Gillen's capability to lead from the front lines. Finally, he hands him a laptop, calling it a simple gift. Jonathan studies the screen and realizes that what he's looking at is not only an autobiography, but also a compilation of investment study materials. He's stunned, recognizing that this is the very process that has guided all of their investment analyses so far. In disbelief, he asks Sun who if he holds a doctorate or some other advanced degree. His reaction is understandable. Sun, who has packaged theories that, in this world, haven't even been discovered yet. Sun, who clarifies that he isn't the author. In fact, he deliberately left the introduction blank. He explains that if a book like this were ever published under his name, no one would be able to question his abilities again. Jonathan, at a loss for words, reluctantly accepts the idea. He admits that while the famed Sun who would gain is inevitable, he wants him to stop speaking so formally. Age doesn't matter. He insists they're no longer just business partners, but equals. Friends. The thought catches Sun who off guard. For him, there has never been room for friendship between awakened beings. Jonathan once shared loot and points simply because they were colleagues, but this Jonathan feels different from the one he remembered. Perhaps it's fine, he thinks, to allow himself at least one friend. They seal it with a fist bump, marking the beginning of their friendship. Later, at school, Sun, whose class is informed by the teacher that Yanhai will be taking a leave of absence due to personal reasons. He recalls that after the spring holiday, rumors had begun to swirl about her. Her own mother had even come to the school, furious that they had hired someone she claimed was mentally unstable. Because of that, he had to put his plans on hold to confirm whether Yanhai was truly awakened or not. But today, none of that matters. Today is critical. This is the only chance to raise his stats before the trial opens, and he must be ready to face it. Arriving at the facility he had built, he reflects on its design. Hidden within this gated property is the entrance to the dungeon. disguised cleverly as a mental hospital and ideal defense. He acknowledges Choi's craftsmanship, thinking that if Choi keeps progressing like this, he could transform their company into something as powerful as Ilju Construction, assuming Sun, who returns alive. He steps into a room where a portal materializes before him. The system prompts him with a warning. Does he truly wish to enter? He hesitates briefly, aware that this dungeon, though low tier, is unforgiving. Entering without a single escape stamp is practically suicide. Yet, it's the only way to grow stronger. With determination, he chooses yes. A staircase spirals downward into the depths. With a flashlight in hand, he tests the entrance, only to see the beam abruptly fade. Just as he expected, no electronics or firearms will work inside. His survival depends solely on the sword he forged in Nam Demon, a few painkillers, some rations, and a modest backpack that pales compared to what he once carried. But there are no alternatives. Steeling himself, he steps through. A sudden flare of light envelops him. He has officially entered the dungeon. Previously in our series, the financial world was turned upside down. Jonathan Investment pulled off a deal so shocking, even the top banks laughed it off until interest rates exploded by 400% overnight. Hong Kong's market nearly collapsed. Korea was forced into crisis 2 weeks earlier than history remembers, and Jonathan was suddenly hailed as the god of investment. But behind the glory lurked something darker: hidden identities, billion-dollar schemes, and a plan to monopolize Korea's collapse. And just when it seemed they had secured unstoppable power, a dungeon appeared. A secret no one expected. What happens when financial warfare collides with something far more dangerous? If you want to catch the full story and watch all the recent episodes in this series, the links are waiting for you in the description below. Meanwhile, Jonathan receives an email from Sun, who he opens it, expecting another masterfully crafted plan, but his expression hardens the moment he reads the contents. A will, prepared before entering the dungeon. Inside, Sun, who struggles to survive. Packs of dog-like beasts give him no reprieve, attacking relentlessly. One manages to sink its teeth into his shoulder, but the momentary opening allows him to drive his sword into its eye. Yet another beast immediately lunges at him. Injured, he fumbles to draw his weapon and is thrown to the ground, the creature's jaws closing in for the kill. In a desperate final strike, he thrusts his blade upward, barely managing to pierce it. Exhausted and bleeding, he realizes he has only slain 3 of these scouts. Pulling the last carcass off himself, he identifies them as belonging to Category KF-07 Declan soldiers, often referred to as hounds. They are not the strongest foes, but with his current stats, even dealing with 1 or 2 proves difficult. He studies the dungeon around him. It is a labyrinth, ever-changing with each attempt. The hounds had appeared just beyond the entrance, but there's no predicting what lies ahead. To escape, 3 quests must be completed: a boss quest, a hunting quest, and a duel quest. The only alternative is to use a stamp of escape, something he doesn't have. And the reason he chose this particular dungeon is simple. He knows exactly how to defeat the boss. Furthermore, completing the hunting quest provides the stamp of escape as a reward. Yet, despite this knowledge, he currently appears pitiful, struggling with what is considered one of the easiest quests available. That is when he comes to a halt, confronted by a dungeon box blocking his path. Many awakened have been deceived by such boxes before, mistaking them for bronze treasure chests. If fortune smiles, rewards akin to those from a bronze box may be granted. But if luck fails, the box inflicts a curse, fear, or confusion that could easily cost one their life. If this box curses him now, he won't survive, and truthfully, he does not feel fortunate. Sunhoo finally reaches a door and drops his bag to the ground. Slowly, he grips the handle, praying silently that only a single scout waits beyond it. However, fate offers him no such mercy. Countless hounds lurk behind the door, ready to strike. With a weary sigh, he resigns himself to using his skills earlier than he wished. Channeling Odin's fury into his sword, He smashes the door open and charges into the fray, cutting his way through the snarling beasts. The system continuously updates him with the tally of kills remaining. In the chaos, one hound clamps onto his sword, rendering his physical strength nearly useless. The others swarm, tearing into him until blood covers the ground. Sun Hu collapses among the corpses of the beasts he managed to slay. His body lies still, unconscious until, moments later, he awakens with a scream and a fit of coughing. Trembling, he struggles to rise, forcing himself to check his attributes. It appears he triggered his Man of Adversity ability and remained unconscious for 23 hours. He cannot believe he was forced to use such a skill in the very first room. Still, he's relieved without it. His hand would have been lost entirely. Opening his quest log, he sees only 4 hounds remain, and he has already accumulated 204 points. He reasons that each soldier is worth 2 points, while a bronze box costs 300. The tutorial rewards were surprisingly generous, and he calculates that defeating 4 more hounds will secure his escape. At that moment, 2 hounds emerge from the doorway, drawn by the heavy scent of spilled blood. Sun Hu braces himself, expecting an immediate assault, but they hesitate, as though awaiting something. Then it appears a massive hound with 2 heads. Sun Hu instantly recognizes it as a formidable contest quest, but such a powerful enemy has no place in the first chamber. The beast lunges, striking twice, and he narrowly dodges each blow. Its strength suggests at least an rank opponent far beyond what he can handle, even with Man of Adversity active. One of its blades whirls past, striking down a lesser hound instead. With no better option, Sun Hu makes a desperate sprint toward the dungeon box. As the beast closes in, he dodges another attack, seizes the box, and shouts for it to open. The 2-headed hound's fangs sink into his leg just as the box responds. To his immense relief, it grants him the escape stamp. He activates it instantly, vanishing as the beast hurls him through the air. Suddenly, he finds himself at the dungeon's entrance, standing upright before he even realizes what just happened. Relief washes over him, followed by laughter. The escape stamp had been inside the dungeon box all along. No wonder the 8 virtues and 8 evils were driven mad by the system. This, he realizes, is merely a glimpse of how cruel it can truly be, forcing people to cling on until the bitter end. Pulling out his phone, he shakes his head at his own recklessness for entering the dungeon alone. He then notices 30 missed calls from Jonathan, who is undoubtedly frantic. Choosing to return the call later, he instead dials Yanhai, his teacher. He suspects she never made it to the hospital. Hearing his voice shocks her deeply, but she eventually rushes there, horrified by the state he is in. He reassures her, insisting there's nothing to worry about and urging her to come inside. But she hesitates, disturbed by the fact that the building is labeled as a mental hospital. Sun Hu calmly explains that the sign is a mere deception, and that they are the only ones present. Though unsettled, she agrees, admitting the situation feels unreal. Sun Hu acknowledges this and tells her he called her here to clarify her strange experiences. If she possessed the right skills, she might have already read his thoughts, but such abilities demand both training and time. He asks her to make a choice now. Will she return to her old life, branded as insane, or will she follow him? Inside, he shows her the image of a hound, sending her reeling in horror. He quickly calms her, assuring her it is nothing more than a fragment of his memory, not a living threat. Yanhai's abilities have not yet fully developed, but she was still able to glimpse some of his memories. The sudden rush overwhelms her, and she begins trembling, making him wonder if this is too much for her to endure. Yanhai asks if they were truly chosen to fight those monsters, and whether those creatures are destined to attack the entire world. Sun Hu confirms her fears, adding that he has long been preparing for the day such a calamity begins. Beneath the stairway they stand upon, countless monsters of the same kind she had just witnessed are waiting. He hands her a folder, explaining that it contains a contract. If she chooses to raid dungeons with him, She will be compensated according to the terms within. If she refuses, then she should simply live a normal life as if none of this had happened, at least until that inevitable day arrives. Not everyone, he explains, will have the ability or resolve to fight. With that, Sunhoo escorts her out and tells her that he will wait until tomorrow for her answer. This is a decision between life and death, he warns, so she must think carefully. Yeonhai's strange experiences began back in middle school. The first was a blue window that only she could see. When she told her mother about it, instead of comfort, she was dragged to a prayer house in hopes of being cured. Later, without warning, she began sensing the emotions of others, trying to piece together how they connected to her. Yet nothing meaningful ever emerged except with one person. The one she felt most drawn to was Sunhoo. At first, she thought she might gain some clues from him. Instead, she now finds herself burdened with far more than she ever expected. The contract outlines extraordinary terms, an upfront payment of 200 million won, with an annual salary of 1 billion won. For each dungeon entry, she would receive an additional 500 million as an incentive, along with another 500 million as a survival bonus for making it back alive. The death bonus is an astonishing 3 billion won, leading her to wonder how he could possibly have access to such vast sums of money. The sheer weight of it makes her wonder if she is cursed. Later, she approaches Sunhoo again, and he asks whether she has reached a decision. Yeonhai rolls down her car window, visibly exhausted. He understands her unspoken choice. Welcoming her into this hidden world, he tells her that she is now experiencing a pre-incident awakening. As they drive, he asks her to ease off the accelerator, noting that she is going too fast. He also tells her that if she is only doing this out of some misplaced sense of obligation toward him, then she should abandon the idea entirely. Yeonhai disagrees. She is actually grateful to him. Before he revealed the truth to her, her only thoughts were of how to end her life. Now, not only does she have a reason to continue, but there is also no logical reason to turn down such immense wealth. And besides, she isn't insane after all. Sunhoo notes that she is only pretending to be strong, pointing to her trembling hands. She asks if he really has that kind of money, and he assures her that she will receive it once they arrive. Yeonhai studies him for a moment before demanding to know why he speaks to her so casually. Could it be that he is older than he appears? Sunhoo sighs, admitting she could see it that way, but insists that age is irrelevant in the world they are entering. In time, she will come to understand this truth. They soon arrive at Jonathan's location. Shocked by Sunhoo's presence, Jonathan immediately asks whether he was followed, given his fame. But Sunhoo brushes this aside, noting that such matters are meaningless now. Jonathan knows further argument would be futile and lets it go. Yeonhai looks at Jonathan curiously, asking if he is the hunter she has heard about. Sunhoo introduces him properly, saying this is the man who will oversee the execution of their contract. Forbes lists him among the top 20 billionaires in the world, a man known as the God of Investment. This is Hunter Jonathan. Later, Yeonhai exits the office, stunned by the realization that she now possesses 200 million won. She also finally meets Jonathan face to face. From the window, Jonathan watches her leave and asks Sunhoo why he would hand such a staggering sum to this girl. If she were to disappear, her father would even receive 3 billion won as compensation. What is going on? Sunhoo apologizes, saying he cannot yet disclose the reason, but promises to explain in time. For now, Jonathan must simply endure. To lighten the atmosphere, Sunhoo suggests they eat. He mentions that he ordered from the menu Jonathan enjoys. As they eat, Jonathan comments that the food is fairly average in quality. Sunhoo explains that the restaurant they usually favored Jonathan's preferred one had recently closed down. Jonathan is shocked, remarking that things must be dire if even a restaurant serving such delicious food has closed. Sunhoo explains that this isn't an issue limited to their country. He points out that much of the foreign capital that once flowed into Asia has moved elsewhere. Jonathan recalls that it went to Eastern Europe and Latin America. Sunhoo then reminds him of one more destination, Russia. When Jonathan looks into it, he is astonished at the sheer number of nuclear weapons the country possesses, realizing it's essentially untouchable. Sunhoo acknowledges that everyone sees it this way, but insists that they will be going there regardless. He shifts the topic, reminding Jonathan of his earlier question about Jillian's abilities. Jonathan had wondered whether Sunhoo personally recruited her, since he would never doubt the competence of anyone from the Morgan Group. Sunhoo responds that their real competition lies with Russia, as whichever side climbs higher first will reap the rewards. However, he won't leave Jonathan empty-handed. He introduces him to someone nearly as talented as Jillian, Brian, whose Korean name is Kim Chong-soo. Though Brian doesn't appear remarkable at the moment, Sunhoo assures Jonathan that with proper guidance, he will prove to be a hidden gem. Jonathan remarks that if his only responsibility is to keep an eye on Brian, then perhaps he can finally rest after working non-stop. Sunhoo dismisses this idea, stressing that there is no time for rest. Stakes must be raised, as a major event is approaching: the sale of Russian government bonds. They intend to set the market ablaze with $1 billion. On board a plane, Jonathan mutters that Russia is practically finished, burning through such a massive sum. Smirking but sweating, he thinks to himself, it has begun again. Sunhoo declares that Jonathan, Jillian, Jessica, and Chong-soo, the knights of their financial empire, have begun to move. With that, he decides it's time to prepare for the dungeon. He commands Yeonhye to stab him. Trembling and barely able to hold the knife, she protests that none of this feels right. Sunhoo reminds her that in an actual dungeon, hesitation would have already cost her life. By refusing, she is also violating the first clause of her contract. All dungeon-related orders are absolute, including training. Has she already forgotten? He reflects on Yeonhye's ability. Her sensitivity trait allows her to irregularly sense and transmit the emotions of others, but he considers it minor compared to a skill of hers that caught his attention: Mary's touch. This unique ability nullifies an ally's incapacity to fight, though it comes with a 24-hour cooldown. Sunhoo has never encountered anything like it in this era, so he must test it. He suspects it works by transferring an ally's injuries onto herself. Thus, as Yeonhye stabs him, she simultaneously experiences the same wound. The training is brutal, but necessary. If she hesitates in a dungeon, both of them will die. He urges her to strike. She finally obeys, stabbing him. His adversary trait prevents excessive bleeding, dulling the pain though the wound itself remains. Yet Mary's touch activates, erasing the injury entirely and strengthening his adversary trait further. The toll, however, is devastating for Yeonhye. Her small body convulses under the pain, as if she were on the verge of death. Sunhoo wonders if she will be able to use this ability inside a dungeon without faltering. After many hours, she regains consciousness and asks how long she was unconscious. Sunhoo informs her she slept for 12 hours. She admits that at first she thought she would die, but the experience was easier than expected. He cautions her to be careful over the next few days, since she only feels fine because of the painkillers. Dressing, he tells her he has to step out but will return, and that she should focus entirely on recovery. She nods, agreeing, since orders concerning the dungeon are absolute. Sunhoo then visits Junal Investment to see his father. While his father is speaking with a colleague, he spots his son and proudly introduces him. The man compliments Sunhoo's appearance, asking which university he attends. To his surprise, the father replies that although Sunhoo looks mature, he is still only a middle school student. The man is astonished and remarks how fortunate the father must feel to have such a reliable son. He even gives Sunhoo some pocket money, which, despite being the actual head of the company, Sunhoo accepts graciously. As father and son walk together, the elder explains that he wanted to show him the company at least once and also discuss something important. He reveals that he has been promoted twice, a secret he has kept because he plans to surprise Sunhoo's mother that very evening. Furthermore, he will officially begin his new role at the company tomorrow. The foreign exchange bank left Sun, who deeply surprised. His father admitted that he had pushed himself hard, but wasn't sure if his efforts were good enough. Placing a hand on Sun-who's shoulder, he remarked that this was a foreign company and questioned why their own nation had reached such a state. He added that it would please him greatly if his son developed an interest in the economy. Sun, who noted to himself that today marked the return of his talisman, and his intuition proved correct when his father handed him a bank account. He advised Sun, who to carefully consider which stocks to invest in and to always consult with him beforehand. Sun, who reflected that this account was what pulled him into the world of finance, where he endured his trials on Wall Street. This, he thought, was the start of a butterfly effect. With this, preparations for entering the dungeon were complete. At the mental hospital, Yanhai practiced with a crossbow. Sun, who observed her skill, though he doubted whether she could pierce skin with it. Close combat was not an option for her. He reminded her that tomorrow they would enter the dungeon. She asked if there was anything else left to prepare. Sun, who coldly remarked that if he had one recommendation, it would be to write a suicide note because surviving would be unlikely. Once inside the dungeon, Sun, who began slaughtering hounds while Yanhai could only stand back and watch. She quickly realized how naive her earlier assumptions about dungeons had been. They existed only for killing whether man or beast, and the line between humans and monsters was nearly indistinguishable. Sun, who shouted at her to heal, and she obeyed, restoring his wounds slightly. He pulled himself out from beneath a pile of corpses and praised her for not losing her sanity so quickly. The system then rewarded them with an escape seal for completing the hunting quest. Sun, who claimed it for himself, asking if she objected. Yanhai shook her head, showing bravery that surprised him, since she understood how rare such an item was. It was one of the few ways to escape the dungeon. As they continued forward, Sun, who thought to himself that having a healer was invaluable. If he were alone, he would have had to endure all the pain himself. He hadn't expected someone from the spiritual world to become his ally, as the only other escapees with such abilities had been notorious evil people. An ability user capable of unpredictable attacks was truly terrifying. That was when Yanhai cast her phobia treatment on him, trembling as she did so. Sun, who acknowledged that this was how they would proceed. The connection to the spiritual world left him sensitive, but he reassured her it was fine. He was merely remembering the past, nothing more. Yanhai apologized and asked if they should pause until he recovered. He refused, saying she was acting exactly as he had instructed, to never hesitate, even with the smallest suspicion. They opened the door to the second chamber, and Sun, who was taken aback by the sight before him. He reminded Yanhai not to forget his instructions about two-headed monsters. He launched into battle, but the beast overpowered him, tossing him around like a rag doll. Yanhai could only watch, forbidden from using healing or Mary's touch, and unable to interfere. Sun, who told her that if any creature came for her, her only duty was to run and not look back. She obeyed, though her poor stamina made her feel as though her heart would burst. Still, she was unable to use Mary's touch, leaving her to wonder what she needed to do to survive. The system intervened, informing her that she had fulfilled a dire request and must now decide between the agreement of the first and second ranked players. Smiling as a beast charged her from behind, she declared that Sun was the victor. Sun, who, through sheer skill and attributes, managed to defeat the two-headed dog, but countless hounds still swarmed him. The system then confirmed that he had fulfilled the conditions of the one-on-one combat quest, and that the first and second ranks would be determined by mutual agreement. Sun, who smiled, realizing she was still alive. In his final 10 seconds, he activated Man of Adversity, tearing through the pack of hounds. When he awoke from his slumber, his thoughts drifted strangely to the first evil. He imagined that man had endured similar chaos. In the past, Sun had envied his character, but he had never imagined the depth of pain that came with it. Yanhai approached, exhausted, explaining that she had used every ability she had, but none were effective. Sunhoo congratulated her for surviving as long as she had, even in her weakened state. At first, she believed her survival was thanks to the traps she had set earlier, but she realized she had been wrong. When a hound lunged at her, she had instinctively dodged and fired a perfect shot into its eye. The beast went berserk, but she stood her ground, counterattacking at the critical moment. Sunhoo admitted to himself that he had considered her little more than baggage, but he had been completely mistaken. He never imagined that a beginner healer, someone who hadn't even found her footing yet, could endure such perilous situations. Over the past week, they had cleared the dungeon of every box. The objective of the final quest was simple yet merciless: defeat everything within. Once every boss was vanquished, the dungeon itself would collapse. To prepare, he collected all the boxes and strengthened his skills for the inevitable boss battle. Of course, there were times when curses emerged from the box's curses so severe that even he couldn't endure them alone. That was why Yanhai was essential. Yet every time she dispelled a curse, he couldn't help but be reminded of those two malicious individuals. After all, to remove a curse, it had to be transferred to another. The thought of a presence capable of invading his mind at any moment left him deeply unsettled. Eventually, they reached the final chamber, where the dungeon's master awaited. He assessed the challenge. This place would normally require at least 5 E-class hunters to barely conquer. And yet here they were an F rank and another who didn't even qualify as that. Still, he assured himself that if their plan succeeded, it would be over quickly. They had survived so much already. She couldn't fall here. Yanhai confirmed she was ready, and together they dropped their bags before stepping inside. The massive doors opened, revealing a pale, albino hound seated regally on a throne, surrounded by countless other hounds. Sunhoo noted the absence of double-headed beasts and recalled how, during his first visit, laughter had filled this room. But that laughter turned to horror when they realized their mistake. With each hound slain, Anubis had grown stronger, transforming into a demon of battle. Sunhoo wasted no time. He activated every skill he possessed, enhancing his speed and armor, then charged forward with a roar, demanding they move aside. He leapt at Anubis, who merely stared back. Attempting to strike decisively, Sunhoo landed close, but Anubis laughed. A hound lunged to bite him, but Sunhoo blocked with his iron gauntlet, smashing the creature away. The gauntlet was left badly damaged. Iron or not, it had its limits. With no other choice, he pressed on, punching through the swarming hounds. Meanwhile, Yanhai activated her healing ability, cloaking herself with a faintly enchanted F-rank item. Though simple, it concealed her presence enough to fool beasts consumed by bloodlust. She watched in horror as wave after wave of hounds overwhelmed Sunhoo, who continued to push forward. His skill man of adversity had a short duration, and they only carried a single escape talisman. A hound struck him across the head, and the effect triggered his stats surge dramatically, though only for 5 minutes. To him, it had become a battle against time itself. With strength now elevated to the level of D rank, no number of hounds could stop him. The minutes bled away, and with only seconds left, Sunhoo reached Anubis. The beast attempted to unleash a beam of energy, but Sunhoo evaded and drove his knife deep into its chest. Following up, he leapt onto the monster and slammed down upon its face. The attack left Anubis broken but Sunhoo gravely injured. Yanhai, desperate, invoked Mary's hands, taking all his pain into herself. Her concealment faded. The hounds instantly detected her, but Kim rushed to her side, horrified at her weakened state. Lifting her into his arms, he urged her to stay conscious. At that moment, the system announced their success, asking her to declare her first and second priorities. Barely able to speak, Yanhai chose him as her first priority. Sunhoo realized Anubis's strike had grazed her artery. She was bleeding heavily. Still, he refused to abandon her and vowed to save her from this nightmare. He somehow managed to escape the collapsing dungeon, though the details blurred in his memory. What mattered was that they survived. Yanhai endured, thanks to a reward she had claimed as her second priority, the attribute of resurrection. It granted her the ability to sustain the faintest spark of life even through mortal wounds. As for him, chosen as her first priority, he obtained Devi's sword, a skill once wielded by the first virtue of this generation. It was far more than a mere ability. Even the strongest had once feared it. To think that he now held both the attribute and the skill of the first virtue left him utterly awestruck. Meanwhile, their financial empire flourished. Across the world, momentous news broke. From Moscow came the declaration of a moratorium. In New York, the people raised their voices in praise of Brian. In the British Isles, it was Jillian's name that was celebrated. It seems that accounts with a loss rate of 40% surged, creating what could only be described as a miracle-like recovery. Jonathan calls Sun Hu and informs him that they secured a profit of 450%, a staggering total of $90 billion. Brian had truly accomplished it. The office erupts in chaos and celebration. Sun Hu, however, points out that while the results are remarkable, losses still remain. The male division of the business achieved an even higher profit margin of 615%. He decides that once Yanhai wakes up, he will hand over the full shares of the new medical corporation to her. With the dungeon within the facility destroyed, it can now be fully converted into a hospital. He follows through and presents her with the promised rewards. The total amounts to $2 billion, leaving Yanhai stunned. She finds the figure overwhelming, especially given how little she earned while struggling through sponsorship activities. Sun Hu reflects that it must have been difficult for her, but now, with this medical facility, countless more people can be helped. He asks if she has reconsidered her stance on entering dungeons. Yanhai studies the documents and admits she will need significant resources moving forward. She tells him that she will continue to rely on him as a leader in the future. A few men nearby cast curious glances toward Jessica as she approaches Sun Hu. She remarks that it has been quite some time since they last met and hands him a fresh investment proposal, this one from the same director who authored the Russian investment deal. She explains that her superior, Jillian, holds her in high regard, and she needs Sun Hu's opinion on this matter. Sun Hu responds that there is no immediate urgency, but suggests they follow Jillian's recommendation, selling major its stocks in New York's NASDAQ market. Jessica expresses concern, understandably cautious about the unconventional nature of risking $30 billion with no safety net. Yet, she begins to come around. Though Sun Hu downplays his role, he has been carefully observing Jillian's strategies from a distance, intrigued by the opportunities. Meanwhile, Jonathan, having monitored Lee Chung-hoo's performance, pursues his own path. Jonathan meets with a man introducing a new search technology. While the man begins explaining, Jonathan reveals he is already aware of it and calls it $1 million idea. The inventor is surprised by the valuation, remarking that such a sum could fund a PhD immediately or be stretched over time. However, the technology has no current buyers, forcing the creators to run the company themselves. They have managed well, but this period, just after the IPO, remains the most advantageous time to secure shares. If they were to sell outright, the team would be forced to abandon the project and return to their academic programs. Jonathan initially offers $1 million but quickly changes course. Producing a $10 million check, he compels the man to reconsider everything. The inventor insists he has a partner and must consult with them. Jonathan, glancing at his watch, warns that he leaves for Washington in an hour, granting only 10 minutes for discussion. The man departs briefly, then returns, expressing gratitude but attempting to decline. Jonathan refuses to accept a rejection, instead offering another $10 million. The man, overwhelmed, concludes that if the god of investment himself is this invested in their future, their success is almost certain. He admits they already feel confident but listens as Jonathan poses a question. Does he know how Jonathan built his empire? The man replies that he read Jonathan's book, finding it inspiring. Jonathan clarifies that his fortune was not the result of luck or recklessness. He staked everything twice, recognizing extraordinary opportunities, and his calculations had proven flawless. Today, he explains, he has identified his third transformative moment. Jonathan presses further. How much does the man believe he is willing to stake on this opportunity? Their firm holds over $500 billion in liquid assets across the United States, Canada, and Japan. Yet, Jonathan advises, they must return to first principles. When someone desires something desperately, they rarely reveal their true intentions. Jonathan has not concealed his. Did the inventor reconsider his own? The man asks what he means. Jonathan explains that initially the man's only focus was selling, but now, after meeting him, that has shifted. What changed? Is he so confident that he can generate more value than what was originally proposed? If so, Jonathan will not stop him, even if he walks away now. At that moment, Jonathan casually picks up his phone and cancels his Washington meeting, declaring that something far more urgent has arisen. The man suddenly realizes this is not simply an opportunity. This is a genuine threat. Jonathan declares that he will do everything in his power for his own sake and promises to be crystal clear from this point forward. He insists that this check is not the end, and that eventually the man will have no choice but to crawl back to him. The man begins to tremble, sweat forming on his brow, as he wonders why Jonathan would go to such extremes in the first place. He picks up the checks, gripping them tightly, and responds that he will treat the matter with the utmost seriousness. However, he demands 50% of the shares, along with guaranteed management rights. If Jonathan is truly that passionate about their technology, then this should be the minimum guarantee. Jonathan studies him for a moment, then smiles faintly, apologizing for the threats he had made earlier. They shake hands, and Jonathan remarks that fate seems tied to his name, expressing his hope that their new search engine, Google, will live up to it. The man says he's eager to share the news with his partner and takes his leave. Jonathan bids him farewell, but once he is gone, Jonathan's expression hardens. Sun, who steps out of a nearby room, congratulating him on how well he handled the negotiation. Jonathan, however, is seething furious that the man dared to turn down $20 million. Sun, who calmly suggests that perhaps Jonathan believes $20 million is excessive for a startup, but reminds him that shares should never be sold cheaply, especially since this company is bound to grow tremendously in the coming years. At that moment, Jonathan receives a call. The voice on the other end informs him that they have found the cat. The call comes from John Clark, a former mercenary turned Wall Street private detective. Clark abandoned the battlefield for safer, more profitable work, though he often finds the job dull. Recently, however, they had taken on a case that couldn't be solved within legal limits. Clark proposed services beyond the law, which impressed their client, allowing him to secure a powerful new connection. In a van, the men prepare with weapons, while Sun, who explains that their target had been difficult to track because he was previously held in a detention center, suspected of first-degree murder. He was released due to lack of evidence, but Sun, who is convinced he was guilty. Jonathan gives him a sharp look, and Sun, who immediately signals the men into position. He orders them to surround the building and to shoot on sight if the target attempts to escape. Reflecting on their mission, Sun, who notes the insanity of committing cold-blooded murder at the age of 13, concluding that their target must have been deranged long before now. He informs Jonathan and their new recruit, T-Boy, that the three of them will confront the target directly. However, he warns against underestimating him because of his youth. Doing so would mean certain death. The payment for success stands at $1 billion. Although they don't fully understand why their employer wants a 13-year-old eliminated, the promise of such money is enough to keep them moving forward. The operation begins. The team quietly moves into position, approaching the building. Sun, who hears the sound of water running in the bathroom, a sign the boy hasn't noticed their arrival. Suddenly, the door bursts open and, with shocking speed, the boy disables T-Boy and Jonathan in an instant. Sun, who seizes the moment and opens fire, but the boy effortlessly dodges every shot. He yells at his unconscious comrades to recover quickly and start firing. When they do, the bullets are stopped by a glowing barrier, a magic seal that absorbs damage. Sun, who realizes the boy must already be at least C-grade in power. The others fire in disbelief, stunned that nothing can penetrate. Seizing the chance, Sun, who charges with Debbie's sword, breaking through the barrier and slamming the boy into a wall. He follows up with Odin's fury and attempts to restrain him with a shackle made of enchanted metal, hoping to end the battle then and there. But the attack is blocked, the shackle fails, and the boy counters. Sun, who narrowly evades and retaliates with a crushing punch, sending the boy sprawling. Realizing that his physical strikes can penetrate, Sun, who unleashes a brutal barrage, hammering the boy relentlessly while Jonathan and T-Boy watch. Just as it seems victory is near, the boy catches Sun, whose arm, and halts him. With the trait known as Man of Adversity, he endures the onslaught and headbutts Sun, who. The others attempt to shoot him down, but he vanishes instantly, using teleportation. Sun, who shouts that the range is only 24 meters, he's still close. He orders one man to cover the rooftop, another to the basement, while he himself searches the streets. That's when Sun, who suddenly feels the pain of a knife, one that had been launched inside him all along. Because of this, the Man of Adversity activates, and Sun, who can only scream in rage, realizing they have been outplayed. Even with their heightened senses, they are unable to locate Bobby. As the Man of Adversity gradually fades, so too does Sun, whose consciousness. The next day, Sun, who walks along and notices that even the battle-hardened soldiers' men who have endured countless trials cannot hide their unease. It is to be expected. What they witnessed yesterday was an entirely new level of violence. Inside, a deceased man lies atop a stack of boxes with T-Boy and John watching over him. Sun, who observes that he died from a poison-based skill. If such a skill had been directed at him to merely cause fainting, an ordinary man like this would have likely had his intestines melted from the inside out. He asks for the man's name, and John responds that it was Brown. Sun, who reflects that once this ordeal is over, he will establish an insurance fund for the employees. For now, however, their priority must be capturing that rat bastard. John questions how they are supposed to catch someone like Bobby, and whether it's even possible. Sun, who explains that the longer they delay, the stronger Bobby becomes. If they let this opportunity slip, not even a large military force will be able to stand against him in the future. John acknowledges that if this is true, then this is no longer just a simple job, and he agrees to move forward. Later, John compiles a report on Bobby's actions. His victim had been a 28-year-old man he met on an online message board. With no murder weapon found, Bobby was released due to insufficient evidence. Even the letter Bobby wrote the night before, pleading his innocence, was sent to the prosecutor in charge of the case, an undeniably clever move. Reviewing the information, Sun, who concludes that Bobby is targeting potential awakeners. He contacts Jonathan to ask how many shares they hold in Gold Online. The message board Bobby used was called Gall, operated by Gold Online. Because of the severity of the crime and Jonathan's position as a majority shareholder, they were granted access to the server logs. Through this, Sun, who discovers that Bobby had been using multiple aliases to lure potential awakeners and eliminate them. He hands John a set of files on people Bobby had contacted and instructs him to place these individuals under surveillance. John asks if they are connected to Bobby. Sun, who confirms they are, but emphasizes that they should only be observed from a distance, as there is a chance Bobby might reach out to one of them directly. He also tells John to personally lead at least one of the squads, stressing the need for better organization if they are to catch Bobby. When Sun, who asks if John needs further advice, John declines but raises the matter of costs. Placing his hand on a container door, Sun, who replies that cost will not be an issue. He opens it to reveal a vast sum of money already prepared with the trust company. "Everything is fine now, right?" he says. With that, his business in America comes to a close. While on the plane, he reads the latest gross earnings rankings, noting Jonathan in first place and Jillian in seventh. Sun, who thinks to himself that holding first place doesn't feel too bad. He reflects on the pension fund that exerts influence over American politics, fueled by the assets of billionaires worldwide, funneled into powerful groups in New York, the Shadow Bank, which controls the global economy from behind the curtain. The title doesn't seem far from the truth. His thoughts are interrupted by a drunken man demanding more alcohol from a flight attendant. She apologizes repeatedly, and Sun, who observes the scene in silence. The drunk notices him and laughs, remarking that although they both sit in first class, they are on entirely different levels. He grabs Sun, whose shirt, praising him, but before he can finish, Sun, who releases a surge of Odin's rage. He had originally mastered the ability as a sort of emergency defibrillator when saving Yanhai in the dungeon, but it appears it has other uses as well. At the airport, Yanho waits for him. She had exchanged the 11 points earned from the dungeon for 11 bronze boxes, but held off on opening them so they could do it together. Since she was contracted to hand over any items she acquired, she wanted to avoid misunderstandings. Inside the car, she wonders aloud what kind of items she might receive. Sun, who can only smirk. Later, inside his office, she opens one of the boxes and obtains a basic health boost. She is genuinely pleased, much to Sun, whose mild surprise. But just as they settle, Bobby strikes again. Sun, who is stabbed, but Bobby instantly disappears through teleportation. Sun, who shouts that the range is roughly 24 meters, meaning he is still nearby. He orders one subordinate to check the roof, another to secure the basement, while he himself searches the streets. As they scatter, Sun, who suddenly notices the knife still lodged inside him, hidden there all along. She opens another one, but this time she gains an item, the dagger of the clown. She asks if it's any good, and Sun can only stare in shock. He knows this item very well and its ability to inflict a random negative effect on whoever it damages. Sun, who notes that it's the same as the 3 one-of-a-kind weapons. But was it perhaps strengthened? Is this really a bronze box item? This was the secret curse that he applied in the spirit world, random negative effects. If the strengthening were to fail, the item would be destroyed, and the 3 one-of-a-kind weapons are the only ones that were successfully strengthened to S tier. The original owner was someone who never stopped digging whenever he was into something, but he didn't imagine he would have gone that far. Elsewhere, Director Park meets with the chairman, who calls him president, as he has become quite an influential man recently. Park's face drops, and the chairman notices, suggesting they should have a drink as punishment. While drinking, Park admits that being CEO doesn't really suit him. However, all of his assets are under his fingers, right? The chairman smirks, noting that his eyes can't lie. At today's meeting, nobody could stand in front of him, like a bunch of scared children. He came here today to ask for a favor. Could Park release the shares that went to the Juno Group? Of course, he would be rewarded with 100 big ones, or rather 1,000. This is the equity in the Honchil Group, which controls shares in the Honol Group. The Dahyung Group recently made a proposal of 200 billion. Park chugs his drink and notes that with his assets, he could do that too. He gets dressed, saying he has to go to work, while the chairman urges him to sit down and accept the offer. He needs money in his pockets to feel full, right? Park says he already listened very carefully, so the chairman should be wise like the old man he is and rethink the offer. The chairman tries to get his attention, but it's too late. Park leaves, gets into his car, and sighs heavily. He can't believe he just refused 100 or even 200 billion in his own pockets. But if he's honest, it felt damn good, and he's glad he's part of Janel. Just then, someone calls him to say that the meeting will be postponed until tomorrow. Park agrees to be there, surprised the meeting got cancelled, and wonders what happened to the woman who refused the Blue House invitation. At Sun Who's office, James looks at all the battle equipment he has, wondering if he's going to war. Sunun, who explains it's just a collection, so she shouldn't worry. He also mentions that the media in this country is very censored when it comes to John, which is why he called her here to ask how the group's investment is doing. She brings news that will surely make him a happy man. They have secured the leasing shares in the top 10 business groups. Amid the nation's turmoil, conglomerates formed slush funds and reorganized their governance structures. For example, the equity structure that leads from Ilsung Group's Dreamland and Life to Ilsung Electronics, then cycles from Ilsung Cards back to Dreamland. This way, the Ilsung Group controls all shares in Ilsung Dreamland. The same can be said for Dujon's Group and Elevator, as well as Hansel Group and Confectionery. They all play key roles in management succession, so they're called leasing shares. Jane notes that it will be good for investors to see this country as a jail republic, both in name and in reality. Summer arrives. History has shifted somewhat, but natural disasters still strike on the exact same dates without exception. On the day the Olga typhoon hit the Korean peninsula, the stock market's heat didn't cool down despite the heavy rain. It seemed to follow New York's dot-com boom, beginning with $10 billion invested in John from Russia after the financial war. Daeon Security quickly released Korea Fund products, and the Cyber Korea 21 policy was implemented soon after. However, on the day Korea repaid its last debt to the IMF, he had to make a decision. He wanted to show his parents that he finished school normally, but he couldn't put it off any longer. He would have to talk with his parents so they wouldn't worry. At home, he explained to his father what companies he was watching and calculated how and when to enter. He shows his father that he was accepted as an analyst for Jonathan Investment, which surprises him greatly. Sunun, who explains that he has been studying since his father gave him that account last year, and his father praises him, calling him nothing short of a genius. Sunun, who thinks this should be enough to please his parents, almost like a declaration to lay down arms, but he still wonders what his father is really thinking. His father asks about the grim expression on his face, and he apologizes. His father tells him he has nothing to apologize for, as he is special and has done nothing wrong. What saddens him is that he won't be able to stay by his side during such an important moment in his life. He wishes he could check up on him and see how he's doing. Hugging him tightly, his father says that he's all grown up now, so there's no need to look back anymore. He should step into the big leagues and do whatever he wants. He adds an apology, wishing he could have given more support had he known. Sunun, who sheds a tear, saying that this is already more than enough and that he's extremely grateful. Later, he speaks with his mother, recalling how Taekwondo was his only hobby back then. She remembers how passionate he was about representing the country, but also points out how forced his smile looked in a picture. She had assumed his workouts were for that, but he hadn't lasted even 3 months. He apologizes, but she simply smiles, saying she's just glad he found his true path, and she means it. He promises to work hard so she'll never have to worry about him again. It seems his parents were more prepared for this news than he thought. Back at the office, he spots Yeonhae, who looks unusually cheerful. Suspecting she might be using one of her skills, he glares at her, but she insists she didn't use anything to boost her mood. Her words put him at ease, and he asks how their research is going. She explains that the explorer wasn't hard to find. Later, they climb a mountain and reach a dungeon portal. Yeonhae removes her hood and points out that it wasn't open yesterday, someone must already be inside. Sunun, who realizes this is why he couldn't wait 3 more years to finish high school. Signs of awakening are appearing everywhere. Yeonhae draws her knife and asks if there's more than one person inside, or if it's just one who must be cautious on their own. He's surprised at her attitude, since he never taught her to be wary of pre-awakened people. Calling her closer, he explains that the heavy rain makes it difficult to detect any real traces, so they should wait. As they do, he worries hypothermia could set in soon, but it's smart of her to leave her hood off since it sharpens her hearing. Suddenly, her eyes widen as the dungeon door fades away. Sunun, who moves in first, urging her to stay behind. A system message appears, confirming he can enter the dungeon. The portal has returned to its sealed state, which means the person inside is most likely dead. When Yanhai asks about it, he confirms and praises her vigilance, saying it's a vital trait in their work. She feels proud, but he reminds himself that even with their escape seals, they can't be sure what kind of monsters await inside. They remove their coats and enter, triggering 3 quests: In Zone, Eradication of Graph, and Hibernation. Sunun, who recalls that graphs are arthropods and remarks that they must be ugly. Yanhai smiles and says she's not afraid of insects, then asks if he is. He notices she hasn't moved from where he told her, but before he can question it, a massive tail drops from the ceiling and a giant beast descends on them. Sunun, who reacts instantly, pulling Yanhai close and shielding her from the monster's relentless attacks. It's a fully grown fluid graph, its tentacles dripping with venom. He warns her to be careful. She stares in disbelief, wondering how something so huge and grotesque could be called fluid. He orders her to get a grip, reminding her they've faced and will continue to face worse. When she presses him on what he means, he explains that some monsters look exactly like humans,